My name is Beverly Bishop, and at 69 years old, I have learned that the most dangerous people rarely raise their voices. They smile. They ask soft questions. They wait. I think of this now because 5 days after my son's wedding on a Thursday afternoon in the second week of May, a black Mercedes I did not recognize came up my gravel driveway and parked beside my old Volvo as if it had every right to be there. I was on my knees in the flower bed with dirt worked into the creases of my knuckles, and I remember thinking with the strange calm that comes over you right before something bad that nobody who belongs at this house arrives in a car that clean. The passenger door opened first. Out stepped Dana, my new daughter-in-law, in a white pantsuit that cost more than I spend on groceries in a year, her heels sinking into my gravel like she resented it personally. Then the driver's door opened and a man I had never seen in my life climbed out with a leather briefcase and the careful neutral expression of someone who bills by the hour and has practiced looking sorry about it. My son Brock was supposed to be 9 time zones away on a cliff above the Aegean on the honeymoon I had partly paid for. He was not in that car. I peeled off my gardening gloves one finger at a time because my hands had started to shake and I did not want them to see it. Something cold turned over in my stomach and a voice in the back of my head that sounded very much like my late husband said, "Here it comes, Bev. Here is the thing you have been waiting 6 months for." But before I tell you what those 2 people said to me on my own porch that afternoon, I have to take you back. Back to the man who built everything they had come to take. Back to a promise I made on a telephone in the dark, and to the reasons I had already learned long before that Mercedes to keep my mouth shut about money. I was a pediatric nurse for 31 years. 22 of them at Belhaven Children's in Kalamazoo, the rest at a clinic closer to home after my knees started complaining. You spend 3 decades reading the faces of frightened children and the parents who lie about how an injury happened, and you develop an instinct that never quite switches off. You learn the difference between a mother who is scared and a mother who is covering. You learn that a rehearsed answer has a particular rhythm to it, slightly too smooth, arriving slightly too fast with the emotional beats landing exactly where a person would expect them to land instead of where feeling actually puts them. I tell you this so you understand something about what comes next. When I say I sensed there was something wrong about Dana from the first Sunday she sat at my table, I am not a lonely old woman inventing a villain to give her days some shape. I am a woman who spent her working life across a table from people performing their innocence, and who got good at it, and who never once enjoyed being right. My husband Norman and I were married for 41 years. Most people in our part of Michigan knew him as the quiet man who built Bishop freight lines out of one second-hand International with a bad clutch. By the end, it was 40 trucks running refrigerated freight across 3 states plus 6 cold storage warehouses, and almost nobody in our town had any idea of the size of it, which was exactly how Norman wanted it. He grew up in a mill town 2 hours north of us, and he left school at 22 to go to work when his father fell ill. That was the whole story as he told it for 41 years. His family had once had a little, and then they had nothing, and the having and the losing had both happened faster than anybody expected. He would say that much, and then he would change the subject with a thoroughness I eventually learned not to fight. Money is a tool, Bev, he told me maybe 500 times over the course of our marriage. It is not an identity. Flash it around and you invite the wrong kind of people to your door. For years I heard that as the caution of a man who grew up without. Poor boys who make good are often like that careful past the point of reason still turning off lights in rooms nobody is standing in. I would tease him about it. He would smile and let me. It took me until I was 69 years old, sitting alone in a small windowless room at a bank with an envelope in my hands, to understand that it had never been thrift at all. It was a warning. He had paid for it in full, and he had been trying to hand it to me for 4 decades without ever quite being able to say why. We lived our whole married life in the same 4-bedroom house on Hollow Creek Road, the one we bought the year Brock was born, with the crooked back step Norman kept meaning to fix and never did. We drove sensible cars for 8 or 10 years apiece. We took 1 week in northern Michigan every August. Everything else went back into the business, into trucks and compressors and the loan on the second warehouse and then the third. 3 years before he got sick, a national logistics chain came after him hard. They wanted the routes and the customer contracts, and after 4 months of talks, they put $50 million on the table for the operating company. Norman took it. He kept the real estate out of the deal, which is a thing people in freight do all the time, and which almost nobody outside the industry understands. The buyer wanted trucks and contracts, not the headache of owning 6 refrigerated buildings, so they leased the warehouses back from us on 12-year terms, and the rent came in every month like a tide. He put the sale proceeds with Dale Brooks, a trust officer at the bank in town who had handled our accounts since 1994 and who wore the same brown cardigan to every meeting for 20 years. Then he came home, made himself a cheese sandwich, and clipped coupons out of the Sunday paper the way he had every week of his adult life. $50 million, and he was annoyed with me that August because I bought the name brand paper towels. Brock grew up in that house with no idea. That was deliberate, and it was Norman's decision, and I want to be honest and say that I was not entirely comfortable with it. Our boy had a paper route. He bagged groceries at the Kroger on Fulton. He paid half of his own car insurance from the time he was 17, and when he wanted to go to Michigan State, we told him what we would cover and what he would have to find himself, and he found it. I asked Norman once when Brock was in his second year and calling home about ramen and a broken water heater whether we were being cruel. Norman put down his coffee and thought about it the way he thought about everything, which is to say for longer than was comfortable. If we hand it to him now, he said he will spend the rest of his life wondering what he could have done. And there is a soft rot that gets into a young person when they know there is a floor under them. It gets into the spine. I have seen it. I would rather he have the money late than have the rot early. I did not entirely agree. I have never entirely agreed. And I will tell you now, before we get anywhere near that black Mercedes, that our beautiful, careful secret is one of the reasons all of this happened. But we will get there. Brock became a veterinarian. I was always the kind of child who brought home things with broken wings. He runs a practice called Birchwood Animal Care out of a converted brick storefront on 3rd Street 4 exam rooms and a surgical suite he financed himself, and he knows every dog in that town by name and the name of its predecessor. Half the owners cry in his exam rooms. He keeps tissues in every room and has never once charged anybody for them. He has a laminated card at the front desk that says if today is the hard day, we will give you all the time you need. And I have watched grown men in work boots read that card and have to look at the ceiling. Norman could not have been prouder if the boy had cured something. He never said so directly because he was not built that way, but he drove past that storefront on his way to nowhere at least twice a week just to look at the sign. The stroke came first in the January before last and took some of the strength out of his left side and some of the certainty out of his voice. The heart attack came 11 weeks later and took everything. 18 months ago now. Brock sat on one side of the bed and I sat on the other, and my husband, who had not been able to find some of his words for a while, found these. "Take care of our boy," he said, "but make him stand on his own feet." Then he went to sleep and did not come back, and 41 years ended in a room with a beeping I still hear sometimes when the house is too quiet. After the funeral, Patricia Hale, who had been Norman's attorney since before I liked her, sat me down at my dining table with a folder and told me the shape of what I had. The sale proceeds invested and grown, the warehouse rents, 2 life insurance policies, a brokerage account Norman had built quietly over 30 years out of the pieces he did not put back into trucks. Patricia added it up in front of me in her small, precise handwriting, and the number at the bottom was $38 million. I remember laughing. It was an awful sound. I said, "Patricia, I have a coupon in my purse right now for 60 cents off cat food." She did not laugh. She said, "Beverly, there are 2 things you need to understand, and I need you to hear both of them today. The first is that because of the way the law treats a transfer between spouses, none of this triggered federal estate tax at Norman's death. We filed the return anyway to preserve his exemption for you, which is a technical thing, and I will explain it as many times as you need. The second is that Norman structured every part of this so that you and only you hold every decision. Not a committee, not a board, not your son, you. There was one exception, and it mattered later more than I could have guessed. Brock had a trust of $1 million that Norman set up when the boy was 11, not payable at 18, not at 25, at 35. Norman had picked that age on purpose because he said a man does not know what money is for until he has been out in the world about 10 years. When Norman died, Brock was 33. So there it sat, $1 million with a date on it 2 years out. Brock knew that trust existed. He had known since he was in college in a general way the way you know about a distant relative's farm. What he did not know, what nobody knew except me and Patricia and Dale Brooks, was the $38 million standing behind it. For a long while, the money meant nothing to me at all. I wore Norman's old plaid bathrobe around the house until the cuffs went through. I watched home videos of Brock's 5th birthday until my eyes burned, and then I watched them again. Our son came by 3 times a week, whether I asked him to or not, and he called every single evening at 7, and if I did not pick up by the 3rd ring, he called the landline, and if I did not pick up, that he got in the car. He was 33 then, single. A little lonely if I am being honest, though he would have denied it with everything he had. He had his animals and a handful of friends from vet schools scattered across the country, and a standing Wednesday poker game with 3 men who had been playing since 2015. He seemed content in the way of a man who has decided not to want the thing he wants, and I worried about it, and I said nothing, because I was raised to let people walk their own road, and I raised him the same way. Then, 6 months before that, Mercedes came up my driveway. My careful, methodical son went to a charity gala for an animal rescue in Grand Rapids and met a woman named Dana Mercer. She was 30 years old and she worked in fundraising. I want to be precise about her job because I did not understand it at the time, and it turned out to be the whole architecture of what happened to us. Dana was a development officer for a mid-sized nonprofit. Development officer is the polite title for the person an organization sends to study its donors. It is a real profession with real training and real software. The central tool of it is called wealth screening. You feed a name into a program and it goes out and scrapes everything a person has ever left in the public record. Property deeds, recorded mortgages and lease memoranda, business filings, corporate sales that made the trade press, political contributions which are public down to the dollar, charitable gifts to other organizations which get printed in annual reports, obituaries and marriage announcements which tell you the shape of a family. It cannot see your bank balance. Anybody who tells you otherwise is selling something. What it can do is build a range and a picture, and in the hands of somebody good, it can build a very tight range and a very detailed picture, and then it tells that person exactly which door to knock on and what to say when it opens. Dana was good. I learned later that she had been named to a regional list of top young fundraisers 2 years running. The night Brock first told me about her, none of that crossed my mind because he called me at 7 the way he always did, and his voice was doing something I had not heard it do in years. She was standing by herself at the fountain in the courtyard, he said, in this blue dress. And when she turned around, I forgot what I was going to say, Mom. I literally could not remember the sentence. 2 weeks later, they were exclusive. 2 months later, she had moved into his apartment, which knocked the wind out of me, because this was the same young man who told me at 28 that he valued his own space too much to live with anybody before there was a ring involved. I said something congratulatory into the phone, and then I sat in Norman's chair for a while with the television off. She came to Sunday dinner a month after the gala. I made the roast chicken and the potatoes Brock has liked since he was 6, and I put out the good napkins, and I told myself firmly that I was going to love this woman. I remember the click of her heels coming up my hallway. I remember the bag on her arm, which I did not recognize, but could tell had a name attached to it, and the diamonds in her ears, which were small and very good. She was beautiful in a composed way, dark blonde hair pinned back, and she took my hand in both of hers at the door and said my name like she had been practicing it. She was lovely for an hour. She asked about my nursing. She laughed in the right places at Brock's story about the goat. And then over dessert with her fork resting on the edge of the plate, she looked around my living room and said, "Your home is so charming." And there was something in the way she looked at it that I have thought about 1,000 times since. She was not admiring it. She was pricing it. "Brock mentioned your husband ran a trucking company," she said. "Was that a small local outfit?" "Norman built it from one truck," I said. "It was his life's work. And he sold it before he passed," she said. "Not a question. It must have been a comfortable retirement for you." Brock changed the subject, God bless him, to something about the clinic's new autoclave. But the moment went into me sideways like a splinter you cannot see and cannot stop finding with your thumb. After dinner, Brock and I did the dishes the way we have done them since he was tall enough to reach the sink, him washing and me drying, and Dana excused herself to the bathroom. She was gone 19 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock on the stove when she left and again when she came back, and I did not know yet why I was doing it. I found it later that night after they had gone. The bottom drawer of Norman's old desk in the study standing open by 1/2 inch. I keep that drawer closed. I have always kept that drawer closed. It is the drawer with the annual statements Dale sends and the copy of the estate inventory Patricia prepared and a folder of Norman's handwritten notes about the warehouse leases that I have never been able to throw away because his printing is on them. Nothing was gone. I checked twice, then a third time with the overhead light on. Every page was there. But somebody had been in that drawer, and the somebody had put it back. Not quite right the way a person does when they are working fast and listening for footsteps. Trust your gut, Bev Norman used to say. It knows things before your head catches up. My gut was talking that night. It talked all night, and I said nothing to my son because he had looked at that woman across my dinner table like a man who had been let out of somewhere, and because of another thing Norman liked to say, which was, keep your cards close until you know who you are playing with. But there was one more thing, and it was the thing that would not let me sleep, and it had happened before the dishes and before the drawer. Over dessert, Dana had been talking about how stressful it must be to keep track of so much property. And she said offhand, buttering it with sympathy, even just keeping the books on something like Cold Storage Unit 4 must be a nightmare. Cold Storage Unit 4. I sat with that for 3 days. I turned it over and over like a stone in my pocket. Brock did not know the warehouses by number. Brock could not have told you there were 6 of them. I had never discussed the warehouses with Dana at all, not the count, not the towns, and certainly not that the 4th one, the big one outside Galesburg with the new ammonia system, was the largest and most valuable of the set by a wide margin. There is exactly one place on God's earth where a stranger can learn that a building is called Unit 4. When Norman did the sale leaseback, every one of those leases was recorded at the County Register of Deeds, because a 12-year lease gets recorded to protect the tenant, and the recorded memorandum names the property the way the parties named it. Bishop Cold Storage Unit Number 4, Kalamazoo County. Public record. $2 a page, and anybody in the world can pull it. So Dana had run us. Before she ever set foot in my house, before the roast chicken and the good napkins, she had sat somewhere with a screen and pulled my family out of the public record building by building. I did not know that on the Sunday. It took me most of a week to work my way to it, and by then something else had started, something slower and more frightening than a drawer left open. My son began to change. Brock had always been frugal in a way that mildly embarrassed him at parties. He drove an 8-year-old Subaru with 140,000 miles on it, and a tennis ball wedged under the brake pedal to stop it sticking, which he had been meaning to get fixed since 2021. He bought his clothes at the same 2 stores his father had. He once returned a $40 coat because he found the same one for $26. Then there was a watch on his wrist. Not a nice watch. A watch that cost more than the Subaru on the arm of a man who spends his day with his hand inside a Labrador. Then a leather jacket. Then a vagueness in his voice when I asked about either one, which was new because my son had never been vague with me in his life. I deserve to enjoy things a little, Mom, he said. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, and I felt the floor move slightly, because that was not a Brock sentence. That was somebody else's sentence coming out of my son, the way you can hear the original singer standing behind a cover version. The calls thinned. 7 o'clock came and went. 3 days, then 4. And when we did talk, Dana was almost always there in the room with him, contributing a bright little comment every few minutes so that I would know she was listening. Our Saturday coffees became monthly. Then they became a thing we kept meaning to schedule. Once on a Tuesday in March, I called him because I simply missed the sound of him, and Dana answered his phone. He's in the shower, she said. We are so behind on the thank you notes you would not believe the week we have had. And then lightly, the way you would mention that it looked like rain, she said, Beverly, I have been meaning to ask. Did Norman leave the trucking proceeds in a trust, or did everything come to you outright? I want you to understand that I made a decision in that half second, and that I have never been sure it was the right one. I said, oh, Norman handled all of that. I was never one for the financial side of things. It was a lie. It was a flat lie. Norman had sat me down at the kitchen table every January for 30 years and walked me through every account and every clause because he said the whole point of building something is that the person you love does not get eaten alive if you go first. I could have told Dana the maturity schedule on the warehouse leases from memory, but something in me, the same something that hears a rehearsed answer, told me to be the old widow who does not know her own numbers. Dana let it go with a small, warm laugh and said something about how lucky I was to have had someone take care of all that, and I hung up and stood in my kitchen with my hand still on the phone for a long time, troubled in a way I did not yet have a word for. So I did what a suspicious old woman does. I called Ruth Caldwell. Ruth and I have known each other since 1986, when our boys were in the same Cub Scout den, and we discovered we were the only 2 mothers who thought the Pinewood Derby had gotten out of hand. She spent 26 years in bank compliance, which is the department whose entire job is to look at a transaction and ask what is actually happening here. She retired to a condo in Portage with 2 cats and a subscription to 3 newspapers, and she is the least sentimental person I love. I told her the whole thing, the drawer, the questions, the change in my son. And then I told her about Unit 4. Ruth laughed at first, not unkindly. Bev, she said, half of that is available to anybody with a library card. Property records are public. If somebody wanted to know what your husband owned, they could have it in an afternoon. I know that now, I said. That is not the part that scares me. Then what is? The speed, I said. She had it before the first dinner. Ruth was quiet. Then she said, what does this girl do for a living again? I told her. Development officer. Nonprofit fundraising. The silence on the other end of that line went on long enough that I said her name twice. Beverly, she said finally, and her voice had changed completely. Sit down. I sat down in Norman's chair. I want you to understand what that job actually is, she said. I dealt with development people for 20 years from the bank side. A good development officer does not walk into a room and hope. She walks in with a list. Before a gala, she has run every name on the guest list through screening software, and the software has given her a capacity range and a wealth indicator score for every single person who will be in that building. She knows who to spend 40 minutes with and who to spend 4. That is not a scandal, that is the job, and most of them do it honestly for causes that need the money. All right, I said. Now listen to me, Ruth said. She met your son at a gala. Within 2 weeks, she was exclusive with him. Within 2 months, she had moved into his apartment. Beverly, that is not how a 30-year-old professional woman falls in love. That is how a professional closes. I did not say anything. I could not. A woman like that does not fall in love at a fundraiser, Ruth said more gently. She works the room. She finds the largest capacity with the smallest guard up, and then she makes that person feel like the only human being alive. And all at once, the whole 6 months rearranged itself in front of me, the way a magic trick does when somebody shows you the wire, the fountain, the blue dress. Turning around at exactly the moment he happened to look. My son forgetting the sentence he was going to say. It had never been romance. My boy had not been chosen the way a man spends his whole life hoping to be chosen. He had been screened. Somewhere in that woman's bag or on her phone before she ever put on that dress, there had been a row on a list, and on that row was a range with my family's name on it, and she had looked across a courtyard at a kind, lonely veterinarian who cried at his own euthanasia appointments, and she had not seen a man at all. Her love had begun as a cell in a spreadsheet, and I was the only person in the world who had done the arithmetic. I do not remember what noise I made. Ruth talked me down off it for 10 minutes. Before she let me off the phone that night, she made me promise her one thing, and I have thought about that promise almost every day since. Do not tell that girl a single number, Ruth said. Not what Norman left, not where it sits, not $1 of it. If she loves your boy for himself, then your money will never matter to her, and the secret costs you nothing. And if she does not, then every number she does not have is a weapon she cannot use. But Ruth, I said, and I heard how thin my own voice had gotten. What if I am wrong? What if she loves him, and I am just a frightened old woman seeing a thief in every shadow because my husband died, and I have nothing left to be afraid of? Ruth was quiet a moment. Then no harm done, she said. A secret kept never broke anybody, but a fortune handed to the wrong person has broken plenty. So I promised, and I kept it. And I had no idea what keeping it was going to cost me, or how fast the bill would come. It came due 11 days later in the shape of a wedding. Brock called me on a Wednesday evening, 4 months and 1 week after he had met her. His voice had that rehearsed brightness in it that I had started to dread the tone of a man reading something he has been handed. We're engaged, Mom, he said. I asked her last night and she said yes. I gripped the edge of the counter and I made my voice warm because that is what you do. That is wonderful, sweetheart. Have you set a date? Next month, he said. I could not keep it out of my answer. Next month, Brock, honey, that is very soon. When you know, he said. And there it was again. My son, who at 19 made a 2-column list on a legal pad before choosing a major. My son who brooded for 11 days over which ultrasound machine to buy, and then brooded 4 more over the financing. When you know. He had never said a sentence like that in his life. Dana has always dreamed of a spring wedding, he added. Then came a pause. I could hear him gathering himself through, and I knew that everything up to that point had been the runway. I was hoping, he said, that maybe we could talk about you helping with some of the costs. A vet's salary does not stretch the way it used to, and Dana has her heart set on a few special touches. I want you to understand what that was. That was the first time in his adult life that my son had asked me for money. Not a birthday check, not a loan on the clinic, which he had specifically refused when I offered it. He had put himself through the last 2 years of vet school on his own, and he had once driven to Ohio in a snowstorm rather than let me pay for a flight. And I could hear in his voice that he hated it. There was a scrape in it. He was reading somebody else's script and he knew it, and the knowing was making him sick and he said it anyway. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. "Come by this weekend and we will go through it." After I hung up, I went and sat in Norman's study and looked at the photograph on the desk, the one from the company picnic in 2009 where he is squinting and holding a paper plate. "What do?" I asked him. I could hear the answer, or I made it up, which after 41 years is not really a different thing. Protect our boy Bev, but let him make his own mistakes. The trouble I said out loud to a photograph is that I cannot tell which kind of mistake this is. The kind a young man walks away from with a story, or the kind that takes the next 30 years of his life and a good deal of his mother's money with it. What Brock had called a few special touches arrived at my kitchen table that Saturday in the form of a printed spreadsheet. Dana slid it across to me the way a woman hands over a lunch order. She had highlighted the subtotals in 3 colors. A designer gown from a boutique in Chicago, a custom tuxedo, top shelf open bar for $150, a 5-course plated dinner, a 9-piece band from Detroit, flowers flown in from Ecuador, which I did not know was a thing anybody did, a photographer whose website I later looked up out of pure curiosity and who apparently shoots magazine covers between weddings, a venue on the lake with a 2-night minimum. The total at the bottom in bold was $95,000. Brock sat beside her and studied the grain of my kitchen table like there was going to be a test on it. The watch caught the light every time he moved his arm. He did not say one word. "That is a great deal of money for one afternoon," I said. Dana gave a small, practiced laugh, the kind that is designed to make you feel provincial. "Well, we only do this once. And honestly, Beverly, this is quite reasonable for what people are spending now. I priced 3 venues. I looked at my son and I waited for him to lift his eyes and meet mine, and he did not. I can contribute $25,000, I said. I chose that number carefully, and I want to be honest about why. $25,000 is a generous gift from a widow on a fixed income, which is what Dana believed she was dealing with. It is also a sum I could have written 800 times over without checking anything. I did not pick it because it was what I could afford. I picked it because I wanted to sit 3 feet away and watch what happened to her face when the number stopped. What happened to her face was that the smile stayed exactly where it was, and everything behind it dropped about 10 degrees. "That is very kind," she said, "but we were rather hoping you might cover the whole thing." I waited. "Traditionally, the bride's family pays, of course," she said, and she let a small, careful sorrow into it. "But mine is in a difficult spot right now." A difficult spot. I filed it. I did not know yet what I was filing. "Dad would want us to have a beautiful day," Brock said. He finally looked up when he said it, and I have never in my life wanted so badly to reach across a table and shake somebody I love. Using his father to lever open my checkbook. Norman, who wore the same suit to 3 weddings and a funeral and got another 5 years out of it. It was so clumsy and so unlike my son that it did not even make me angry. It broke my heart in a small, specific place. "Your father believed in living inside your means," I said as gently as I have ever said anything. "$25,000 is my gift, and I give it gladly. You two will find a way to manage the rest, or you will have a smaller day, and either one of those will be perfectly all right." They left 20 minutes later, with Dana's disappointment barely inside its container. An hour after that, my phone buzzed. "Dana's pretty hurt," the text said. She says most mothers, especially widows who were left comfortable, would want to do more for their only son. Can we talk about it? I read it 3 times. Widows who were left comfortable. There it was in writing in my son's thumbs in her voice. I did not increase the gift. I wired the $25,000 the following morning, and I let the silence that came after it tell me whatever it was going to tell me. What it told me over the next 3 weeks was that I was going to be pushed to the very edge of my own son's wedding. Dana took control of every decision and consulted me on exactly none of them, except when an invoice needed a signature. The rehearsal dinner was moved twice without my being told. The seating chart put me at table 4, which I would not have cared about at all, except that I discovered it by looking at the chart, not by being asked. She ordered my dress without asking me. A shapeless navy thing 2 sizes too large that made me look like a piece of hotel furniture delivered to my door with a note that said, "So glad we could take this off your plate." When I exchanged it for a dove gray dress that actually fit me, I received a 9-minute phone call about respecting the vision. I let all of it go. Every single piece. I was learning something about Dana in those weeks, which was that each small surrender bought me a little more room to stand still and watch. A woman who believes she is winning stops being careful. And then 6 days before the wedding, She handed me the thing that mattered more than all of it, and she handed it to me like it was nothing at all. She came by alone on a Sunday evening, which she had never done. She had a slim folder under her arm and a pen already uncapped in her other hand, which is a detail I have thought about many times since, because a pen already uncapped is a small act of momentum. It says, "This is already happening, you are just catching up." Just some paperwork for the event insurance, she said. The venue requires a family signatory on the liability rider. Since Brock is tied up at the clinic, the coordinator said any immediate family member works. It is totally standard. You just sign at the little flags. She had stuck colored tabs along the edge. 4 of them. I took the folder and I reached up to my collar for my reading glasses, and they were not there. Now here is where I have to tell you something I am not proud of and have never once regretted. I said, "Oh, let me just get my glasses," and I went out of the kitchen and down the hall to the bedroom, and I took my time. And when I came back and sat down, I did not sign anything. I opened the folder at the first page and I read it. All of it. Slowly. Every line. While Dana sat across from me and talked about centerpieces and hydrangeas and how the lighting people were being difficult. The cover sheet was event insurance. The cover sheet was beautiful. It had the venue's logo on it and a policy number and a paragraph about property damage during the reception. Behind the cover sheet, starting on page 3, the language changed. I had seen that language exactly once before 6 years earlier in Patricia Hale's office when Norman and I did our estate planning, and she walked us through what would happen if either of us could not act for ourselves. Durable. Full authority to act on my behalf in all financial and property matters. Authority to open, close, and transfer accounts. Authority to convey real property. Authority to make gifts. The named individual was not the venue. It was not an insurance carrier. It was a person, and the name was one I did not recognize, and I made myself keep reading anyway. I turned to the last page, and that is where my hands went cold. There was a notarial block at the bottom. State of Michigan, County of Kalamazoo. Subscribed and sworn before me this day. There was a signature in it. There was a stamp in it, an embossed seal, and a printed name and a commission expiration date. It was already notarized. I had not signed anything. I was sitting at my own table, holding a pen I had not touched, and somebody had already certified under seal that they had watched me sign this document. I have never been able to keep my face from doing exactly what it wants, so I kept it pointed down at the paper. "I am sorry, dear," I said. "My reading is not what it used to be, and this is a lot of small print. Let me have Dale look these over and I will get them back to you Monday." Her jaw tightened. It was less than a second. If I had blinked, I would have missed it. "Oh," she said, "the coordinator really needs them tonight. It is just a formality. She has to file with the venue in the morning." "Then the coordinator can call me in the morning," I said pleasantly, and I closed the folder and set my hand flat on top of it. There are moments where two people understand each other completely without saying anything. That was one. She looked at my hand on the folder, and I looked at her, and neither of us moved for about 3 seconds. Then she laughed and said, "Of course, no problem at all," and stood up and gathered her bag, and she left without it. She left without it. That was the mistake. That was the whole thing right there, and neither of us knew it yet. After her car was out of the driveway, I laid all 14 pages out on my kitchen counter under the good light over the sink, and I photographed every single one of them with my phone, including the notarial block twice, once straight on and once at an angle, so you could see the emboss. Then I put the pages back in the folder exactly as they had been, and I sat down and my hands finally started shaking the way they had wanted to for 20 minutes. I might still have talked myself out of it. I want you to know that. I am a nurse, not a detective, and I have spent my life being told that I worry. A pushy bride, a confusing former coordinator who cuts corners with a notary friend to save time. People do sloppy things. I could have built that story and lived inside it. 4 days later, at the final dress fitting, Dana's mother took that option away from me. Her name was Carol Mercer. She was maybe 60 in a department store cardigan and sensible shoes, sitting on the edge of a velvet bench in a boutique where the water came in a bottle with a French label. She looked exactly as out of place as I felt, and I liked her immediately, which made everything afterward worse. Dana was behind the curtain with 2 women and a box of pins. Carol sat beside me and twisted her purse strap around her fingers and tried to make conversation the way people do when they are exhausted and being brave about it. We talked about the weather and the drive. She told me Walter, her husband, had not been able to come because of work, and something happened in her voice on the word work that I did not understand at the time. And then she patted the back of my hand out of nowhere like we had known each other for years. "I have to tell you something," she said. When Dana told us that Brock's family had the trucking company, all those trucks and the 6 warehouses and the sale and everything, well, Walter and I just felt so much better about it. I kept my face absolutely still. After the year we have had, she said, knowing that she would be looked after. Knowing there was that kind of security in the family. It was such a relief. She said relief the way a woman sets down something heavy she has been carrying up a hill for a long time. Her shoulders actually dropped when she said it. I smiled and said something kind, and I do not remember what it was, and the floor of that boutique tilted about 15 degrees under me. Because that one sentence told me 2 things at the same time, and they went in like 2 separate nails. The first was that Dana had described my family's finances to her parents in specific inventory detail. The trucks, the 6 warehouses, the sale. Not a vague impression that Brock's family was comfortable, an inventory. And she had done it early enough that it had already become part of how those 2 people slept at night. The second was in Carol's face when she said relief. That was not a mother pleased that her daughter had married up. That was a woman who had been drowning and had just felt something solid under her foot. The Mercers were not in a difficult spot. The Mercers were going under. And their daughter's marriage to my son was the rope somebody had thrown them. I did not sleep that night. I sat in Norman's study at 2 in the morning with the lamp off. Norman, I said to the dark. Our boy is walking into something and I can see the edges of it and I cannot see the bottom. I thought seriously about telling Brock. I got as far as picking up the phone twice. But I had a pattern and a feeling and photographs of a form and no proof of what anybody intended. I had a mother-in-law with a suspicion and a bride with an explanation for everything. And I knew my son. He was in love, or he had decided he was, which at that stage is the same animal. If I laid all of this in front of him 6 days before his wedding, with nothing but my instinct holding it together, I would not have saved him. I would have handed her the last thing she needed, which was for me to become the problem. So I did what Norman always did when the picture was incomplete. I waited. I went to the wedding. I wore the dove gray dress that fit. I sat at table 4. I watched my son stand at the front of a room in a tuxedo that cost as much as a used car in front of 150 people, half of whom I had never met, and a good number of whom seemed unclear on which side they were there for. Dana came down the aisle in a gown that cost more than the first house Norman and I bought under flowers that had been on an airplane from South America 36 hours earlier. She was, I will say it, the most beautiful bride I have ever seen. Brock's face when he saw her did something I had only seen it do once before when he was 7, and I brought a beagle puppy home in a laundry basket. They said their vows. Her voice did not shake at all. And when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and Dana turned to face the room, she was smiling, and I have gone back to that smile 100 times. It was not joy. I have seen joy on 1,000 faces in 1,000 rooms. It was the expression of a hand closing around something. The champagne went sour in my mouth, and I set the glass down and did not pick it up again. There was one other thing that night, and I did not learn about it for another 2 weeks. At the rehearsal dinner the evening before, Brock had gone out to the parking lot to get his phone charger out of the Subaru, and he had come around the corner of the building and found Dana standing in the dark by the dumpsters, talking to somebody with her back to him and her free hand pressed flat against the brick wall. He heard her say, "After Saturday it is handled. I told you. After Saturday it is handled." She turned around and saw him and hung up in one motion, and she smiled and said it was her boss, that there was a donor crisis, that she was so sorry that she would tell him about it later. And my son, who was getting married in 18 hours, and who could count on one hand the number of people who had ever looked at him, the way she looked at him, said all right. He said all right, and he carried the phone charger back inside, and he did not ask one more question, and he stood up the next day and made a promise in front of 150 people. They left for Santorini 2 days after the wedding, and 5 days after the vows, while my son was supposed to be standing on a white terrace above the Aegean Sea. I was on my knees in the flower bed, cutting back the rose bushes Norman and I planted for our 10th anniversary, and I heard tires on my gravel. I stood up slower than I wanted to, because 69-year-old knees do not care what is happening in your life, and I walked toward that car with my heart going hard and slow. "Dana," I said, "this is a surprise. I thought you two were in Greece until Sunday." "We were," she said. That was all. No explanation, no apology, no smile that reached anything. "Beverly, this is Garrett Vance. He handles our family's money. We need to discuss something important." I looked at him properly for the first time. He was somewhere in his 40s, silver coming in at the temples, a suit that fit him, the way suits fit men who own more than one. He had a pleasant, unremarkable, completely forgettable face, and he shook my hand with exactly the right amount of pressure and said, Mrs. Bishop, thank you for your time, and every single thing about him was correct. I have thought since about how much practice it takes to be that correct. Their family. They had been married 5 days, and there was already a family and a man who handled its money, and my daughter-in-law's voice had dropped every last degree of the warmth she had carried for 6 months. Where is Brock? I said. I looked right at her when I said it. He's at the clinic, she said smoothly. There was an emergency surgery this morning, some Labrador that got into a bag of something. He sends his love. He thought this would go easier without him. That was not my son. I want to be clear about how I knew, because it was not a feeling. My son does not send his mother a stranger with a briefcase and stay at work. If Brock Bishop had something difficult to say to me, he would have driven out here himself, sat at that kitchen table, turned a coffee mug in a slow circle for 10 minutes, and then said it badly. I knew that the way you know a forged signature. It has all the letters and none of the hand. Come inside, I said. I will put on coffee. I said it because I wanted to hear every word of it. We sat in my living room. I poured 3 cups. Nobody drank any of them, and they were still sitting there cold 4 hours later when Patricia Hale walked in. Garrett Vance opened the briefcase on my coffee table and laid out 4 documents with the smooth economy of a man who has done exactly this in other living rooms to other widows more than once. Mrs. Bishop, he said. His voice was deferential and condescending at the same time, which is a difficult trick. It has come to our attention that following your husband's passing, you inherited approximately $38 million from the sale of Bishop Freight Lines and the associated real estate holdings. The number went through me like cold water down the back of my shirt. 38 million. Not a range, not a guess, not an estimate off a property search because a property search cannot see a brokerage account. $38 million was the figure at the bottom of the page in the estate inventory that Patricia Hale had prepared, 1 copy of which sat in the bottom drawer of Norman's desk in a room where a young woman had spent 19 unexplained minutes. I set my cup down very carefully so that it would not rattle. And how, I said, did that come to your attention? Brock came across some of his father's old papers, Dana said. She leaned forward when she said it, and the woman who had called my home charming was entirely gone. What was sitting on my sofa now was flat and hard and honestly a little bored. We were surprised, she said, given how you live. Garrett Vance folded his hands. Mrs. Bishop, he said, Dana and Brock feel that as the sole heir, Brock should have access to a meaningful portion of these funds now, rather than waiting an indeterminate number of decades. Young families have needs that a person at your stage of life may not fully appreciate. We have prepared a reasonable proposal. He slid a page across the table toward me and turned it so it faced me. He had a pen out. Of course he did. $6 million, he said, to allow the couple to purchase a home and settle, along with the transfer of one of the cold storage properties into Brock's name. We would suggest the Galesburg facility as it appears to be the strongest performer. Unit 4. They wanted Unit 4. And frankly, Dana said, we are not getting any younger, and it seems selfish to sit on this much when your own son could be living properly. I have replayed that sentence more times than is good for me. Not getting any younger. She was 30. And if I decline, I said. Garrett Vance smiled. It went nowhere near his eyes. Then we might have to explore other avenues, he said. Mrs. Bishop, I want to be delicate, but there are questions that could reasonably be raised about whether a woman of your age living alone should be managing assets of this size without assistance. In Michigan, any interested person may petition the probate court to appoint a conservator over an individual's property. A son certainly qualifies as an interested person. Courts are sympathetic to an adult child's concern about protecting family wealth. It would be a difficult, public, and expensive process for you. Nobody wants that. There it was. They were telling me that if I did not hand over $6 million and a warehouse, they would go into a courtroom and try to have me declared incapable of running my own life. 5 days into a marriage. In my living room, over coffee I had poured with my own hands into cups I had washed that morning. I want to tell you that I said something devastating. I did not. What I did was stand up, and I felt 41 years of Norman Bishop settle into my spine like a length of rebar. I think you should both leave my house now, I said. Vance stood immediately unbothered, already sliding the papers back into the briefcase. He had clearly not expected to close that afternoon. He was planting. Dana took longer. At the door she turned around, and whatever was left of the mask came off entirely. This is not over, Beverly, she said. You can share what belongs to this family now, or you can lose your son forever. That is the choice you are making. Think about it. Then the Mercedes went back down my driveway and turned onto Hollow Creek Road, and I stood in my front hallway with my hand on the doorframe for a full minute before my fingers were steady enough to work a phone. I called Patricia Hale's office and told her secretary that it was urgent and that I did not care what she was in the middle of. Patricia came on in 90 seconds. I said my daughter-in-law just sat in my living room with a man I have never met and demanded $6 million and a warehouse, and told me that if I refused, they would petition to have me declared incompetent. Patricia did not say HM. She did not say let me think about that. She said Beverly listen to me very carefully and do exactly 3 things. All right. First, do not speak to either of them again. Not on the phone, not in a text, not if she shows up crying. Nothing. All right. Second, sit down at your kitchen table right now before you eat, before you call your son, before you do anything else, and write down every word that was said in that room while it is fresh. Times, who sat where, what he said, what she said in the order it happened. Date it and sign it at the bottom. I am writing it down, I said, and I was already walking to the kitchen. Third, she said, and her voice changed. I want you to hear this part because I think you have been carrying more fear this afternoon than you needed to. They do not have 1 inch of ground to stand on. Not one. Patricia, he was very specific about the probate court. He was, she said. And what he told you was true and completely beside the point. Anybody can file a petition for a conservator. Filing is not winning. To get a conservator appointed over you, they would have to convince a probate judge on the record with medical evidence that you are unable to manage your property because of an impairment. You are a retired registered nurse who does her own taxes, drives votes, and manages a portfolio with a bank trust department. That petition does not survive contact with a courtroom, and I would very much enjoy watching it try. I sat down at the table with a legal pad. And the money, I said. Beverly, a living parent's estate is not an inheritance yet. It is just your property. Your son has no claim to it. He has an expectancy, which is a legal way of saying he has a hope. A daughter-in-law has less than that. She has nothing. There is no cause of action anywhere in the state of Michigan by which those 2 people can compel you to give them $1. Then what were they doing, I said. There was a pause on the line. They were trying to frighten a widow into writing a check before she thought to call a lawyer, Patricia said. That is the entire play. That is why they came to your living room with a briefcase instead of to the courthouse with a filing. And Beverly, I want you to notice something. You did the one thing they were counting on you not to do. I looked around my kitchen at nothing. I called you, I said. You called me, she said. Now write it down. I will be there tomorrow. I wrote it all down. It took an hour and 11 pages because once I started I could not stop, and I put in things I had not known I noticed. That Vance never once said Brock's name without Dana's in front of it. That he had a small nick on his jaw from shaving. That his briefcase had a combination lock, and he had already had it open when he sat down, which meant he had spun it in the car. And when I finally set down the pen, the coffee cups were still cold in the living room, and it had gone dark outside. And I thought somewhere over the Atlantic right now my son is on a plane and he is either flying home to a marriage built on a lie, or he is already home and has no idea what his wife is doing with his name. As it turned out, he was already home. The doorbell rang at 7:10 the next morning before I had finished my first cup of coffee, and my whole body went to ice because I was certain it was Dana come back with a second act. I opened the door and my son was standing on the porch by himself. I want to describe him to you the way I saw him because I have not been able to stop seeing him that way. Brock is a big man, 6'2", built like his father through the shoulders. He was wearing the same blue shirt I had seen him in at the rehearsal dinner Slept In and Slept In Again. His eyes were red all the way through the whites. There was 2 days of stubble on him, and his hair was standing up on one side, and he had that hollow, scraped-out look of a person who has been awake for a long time with nothing for company but his own thoughts. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked in the middle of the one syllable. "Can I come in?" I pulled him into my arms in the doorway, the way I did when he was 6 and feverish, and he was too big for it, and he let me anyway, and I felt him shaking against me. Then I sat him at the kitchen table and put the kettle on because that is what I have always done when my son is coming apart, and I did not ask him anything. I have learned that with Brock you wait. Push him, and he goes quiet for a week. Wait, and eventually it all comes. "We came back early," he said finally. He was staring at the wood grain. "Dana told me she had a work emergency, a donor thing. So we changed the flights and flew home Tuesday night." I set the mug down in front of him. He wrapped both hands around it and never once drank from it. But that was not true, I said. It was not a question, and he did not take it as one. He looked up at me, and the misery in that face was so total that I had to hold myself in the chair to keep from getting up and gathering him in again. Yesterday afternoon, she said she was meeting a colleague, he said. She was gone about 3 hours. When she came back, she was furious. Not loud. She does this thing where she gets very quiet and very precise. She said she had stopped by to check on you. She said you were cruel to her, that you were dismissive, and that you made a comment about her family, and that you humiliated her in your own living room. He shook his head slowly. I almost believed her mom, he said. That is the part I keep choking on. I stood in my kitchen and I let her tell me that about you, and part of me was building the sentence I was going to say to you. So that was the story she had made. A wounded new bride and a cold-hearted mother-in-law. Brock, I said. Dana did come here yesterday, but she did not come to check on me, and she was not alone. And then I told him. All of it straight through, laid down flat the way you set a heavy thing on the floor in front of somebody who has to look at it. The black Mercedes. The man named Garrett Vance, who handles the family's money. The exact figure, $38 million, which no one on this earth had told them. The $6 million. The warehouse and which warehouse and how they knew which one was worth having. The line about not getting any younger. The suggestion in that pleasant voice about the probate court and a conservator and how sympathetic judges are to a son's concern. I watched my son's face go through it like weather. Confusion first, and then a kind of stubborn refusal, and then a slow, terrible arriving the look of a man reading the last page of a story he has been very deliberately not finishing. $6 million, he said. He said it almost quietly. She sat in your living room and asked you for $6 million. And Unit 4, I said. And when I would not take the lump sum seriously, he had a schedule of monthly payments in the folder as a fallback. I saw the tab. Brock put the heels of his hands against his eyes. For a second I thought he was going to cry. What came out instead was worse. It was a low sound in the back of his throat, and it was not grief. It was self-disgust. I did not know she went to you, he said. I swear to you on Dad's grave I did not know about that meeting. I believe you, sweetheart. But I should have known, he said. He took his hands down and his eyes were terrible. That is the thing, Mom. I should have seen every bit of it coming because I already had. What do you mean, I said. And I sat down across from him and took his wrist in my hand, the way I used to take it to count a pulse because I did not know what else to do with my hands. He pulled in a long, unsteady breath, and then my careful, methodical son told me the thing I had not seen, the thing that turned the entire story sideways under me. I knew, he said. Not the demand, not the number, not the man, but I knew there was something badly wrong, and I knew it before the wedding, and I stood up and married her anyway. The kettle ticked as it cooled on the stove. Start at the beginning, I said. The rehearsal dinner, he said. I went out to the lot to get my charger out of the car, and she was around the side of the building by the dumpsters in the dark on the phone, with her hand flat on the wall like she was holding it up. And I heard her say, after Saturday it is handled. She said it twice. After Saturday it is handled, I told you. He turned the cold mug a quarter turn on the table. She saw me and hung up in one motion, not fumbling, one motion like she had practiced. And she smiled and told me it was her boss that there was a donor crisis. And I said, all right. He looked up at me. I said, all right, Mom. 18 hours before my own wedding. Go on, I said. Santorini, he said, second night. I woke up at 3 in the morning, and she was not in the bed. The bathroom door was almost closed, and there was no light on, and she was sitting on the floor in the dark, crying. Not sad crying. I have heard sad. This was the other kind. The kind people do when they are frightened. And she was whispering into the phone, and when she heard me get up, she hung up so fast she dropped it on the tile. He rubbed his face. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she had a bad dream. 2 in a row, actually. She said she had been having bad dreams since the wedding from stress. And she came back to bed and put her arm across me, and I lay there until it got light. And the next morning, I said. The next morning she was in the shower and I picked up her phone, he said. I had never done that in my life. Not in any relationship, not once. I felt sick doing it. My hands were sweating. I was quiet a second. The last call was 38 minutes long, he said. 3:14 in the morning our time, to a number saved with 1 letter, G. And there were others, I said. Dozens, he said. Going back at least 8 months. All of them late at night, most of them under 2 minutes. Except that one. My mouth had gone completely dry. What else, I said. I told me he had started watching after that, the way you start watching a road sign you think you misread. Small things that had been in front of him the whole time, and that he had been carefully arranging himself not to see. She went gray and quiet whenever a certain kind of envelope came, he said. Not bills. A particular kind cream-colored with a return address she always got to the mailbox first to collect. She had a second email account she closed the laptop on when I came in the room. She took calls in the car in the driveway instead of coming inside. And she never ever let me meet her family. 10 months and I met her mother for the first time at the dress fitting. Her father did not come to the rehearsal dinner. He came to the wedding for 40 minutes and left before the dancing and told me it was his back. He stopped. And 2 days before we flew home, he said, and his voice changed, and I understood we were coming to the bottom of it. 2 days before we flew home, she went down to the pool, and I opened the hotel safe. Brock, I know, he said. I know. It was hers, and I had no right, and I did it anyway, and I would do it again. What was in it? There was a folder of papers she had brought with her from home, he said. Her own family's papers. She had carried them 9 time zones to her honeymoon, so they would not be in the apartment where I might find them. He put both hands flat on the table like he was steadying it. She has a younger brother, Mom. Cody. He is 19 years old. Something in me went very still, because I have been a pediatric nurse for 31 years, and I knew in the half-second before he said it exactly what was coming. He has leukemia, Brock said. Acute myeloid. Diagnosed 22 months ago. He relapsed in October. I closed my eyes. The folder was full of it, he said. Bills. Explanation of benefits forms where the plan had denied things. A letter about a clinical trial in Ohio and what it would cost to get him there and keep him there. A notice of foreclosure on her parents' house in Comstock dated in March. And a payment schedule to somebody I could not tell who from the paper with an interest rate written on it that made me physically ill to look at. He looked up. The Mercers are not in a difficult spot, he said. They are drowning. Her father mortgaged the house and then took a second on it, and it was not enough. And somewhere along the way, they went to somebody who was not a bank. And Dana, he said. His throat worked. Dana has been trying to keep her brother alive and her parents in their house. And she decided that the way to do it was to marry me. I sat very still at that table and let it come down on me, this whole terrible new weight. I had spent 6 months building a woman in my head. A cold and grasping creature with a calculator behind her eyes who had looked at my lonely son and seen a bank account with a heartbeat. And I had been right about nearly every single fact and completely wrong about the shape of the thing. Carol Mercer came back to me, sitting on that velvet bench in her department store cardigan with the purse strap wound around her fingers, setting down the word relief. Like a bag of groceries, she had carried up 4 flights, the year we have had, knowing she would be looked after. It had all been true. It had been truer than I could have imagined, and I had heard it as greed. I want to tell you exactly what I felt then, because I am not proud of how complicated it was, and I think the complication is the only honest part. I was a pediatric nurse for 31 years. I have sat on the floor of a hallway at 4 in the morning with a father who had just been told a number. I have watched a family sell a truck, then a boat, then a wedding ring, and then start asking relatives, and then stop asking relatives because there was nobody left who had not already given. I know precisely what happens to ordinary decent people when a child of theirs is dying and the money runs out. It strips a person down to the studs. It makes them capable of things they would have told you 18 months earlier that they would never in their life consider. So one part of me opened straight up for a frightened girl trying to keep her brother alive. And in the very same breath, the other part of me held, and I mean held like a locked joint, because a reason is not a right. Whatever put Dana Mercer at that fountain in that blue dress she had lied her way into my son's life. She had run him through a screening program before she knew the color of his eyes. She had put a document in front of a 69-year-old widow that was already notarized for a signature that widow had not made. And she had brought a man into my living room to tell me over my own coffee that the probate court might have questions about my mind. A dying brother explains a great deal. It excuses nothing. Those 2 truths sat down inside me side by side, and neither one of them would cancel the other. And 18 months later, they are both still there. And that is the most honest thing I can tell you about that morning. But there was another question in the room, and it had been sitting there since he said the word Santorini, and I asked it. Brock, I said, if you knew on the second night of your honeymoon, if you saw the calls and the crying on the bathroom floor and that folder in the safe, why did you say nothing? I did not answer. Why did you get on a plane and come home and let it all keep going? I said. Why not confront her? Why not call me? You called me every night for 18 months, sweetheart. Why not that night? My son looked out the kitchen window at the rose bushes for a long time, long enough that I heard the refrigerator cycle on. And when he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet, and it was not the voice of a 33-year-old man. It was the boy's voice, the one that used to come from under a blanket fort at 11 at night to ask if dogs go to heaven. Because I was ashamed, he said. Of her. Of me, he said. He put his hands around the cold mug again. I am going to be honest with you, the way you are being honest with me, he said. So I am going to say the whole thing, and you are going to have to let me get through it. All right. I am 33 years old, he said. I fix cats and dogs. I am good at it. I like it. And then at 6:30 I lock up and I drive home and I heat something up and I sit in an apartment where nobody has moved anything since I left in the morning. He stopped. I have been lonely for years, Mom. Years. Not sad. Lonely. There is a difference, and nobody warns you about it. And I never told you partly because I did not want you worrying about me on top of everything with Dad, and partly because... He stopped again. Say it, I said. Because Dad made it sound like being alone was a thing a strong man just handled, he said. I did not have anything to put on top of that. Because he was right, and because it had never once occurred to me in 33 years. Norman was a good man. Norman was the best man I have ever known. And Norman's entire philosophy of hardship, which he had gotten from his own father in a mill town, was that you carry it and you do not discuss it, and you certainly do not lay it on the people you love. He said things like a man does not put his weather on the table. He meant it kindly. He was talking about himself, and a boy sitting at that table with him for 18 years had heard it as a rule. And then Brock said this beautiful, clever woman looked at me across a courtyard, like I was the only person standing there. He laughed. One bitter breath out of his nose. I know what that was now, he said. I know she had a number next to my name before she got out of the car. But God, Mom, it felt like being seen. Do you understand I had gotten so used to not being seen that I did not even know it was happening to me until somebody did it? I understand, I said, and my eyes were burning. And when I started finding the cracks, he said. The phone call by the dumpster. The crying. Gee, the folder. Part of me did the exact math you did, and I did it fast because I am not stupid. He looked at me, and another part of me said if you do not look too closely at this, you get to keep being the man that somebody chose. Oh, sweetheart. So I did not look, he said. I got on the plane. I told myself whatever she was dealing with was her business, and she would tell me when she was ready. I built a whole reasonable little house out of that, and I lived in it for 4 days. He turned the mug again. You kept a secret from me to protect me, he said. And I kept one from you. You kept a secret from me to protect me, he said. And I kept one from you to protect myself. And we have both been so busy hiding things from each other that neither of us said one true sentence out loud until about 10 minutes ago. I reached across the table and took both of my son's hands in both of mine. Neither of us said anything for a while after that. There is a particular silence that falls between two people who have just stopped lying to each other. It is not a comfortable silence, but it is a clean one, and we sat in it together while the light came further across the table, and I would not trade that 10 minutes for a great deal of money. Because he was right. He was completely right, and it took me the rest of the year to understand how right. Norman and I had wrapped that boy in a careful, loving secrecy his entire life. We told ourselves it was to keep the rot out of his spine, and I still think we were partly correct about that, and I have watched enough trust fund children to know we were not imagining the danger. But there is a cost we never priced. A young man who grows up inside a family that does not say true things out loud gets very good at not saying true things out loud. He becomes unpracticed at being known. And a person who is unpracticed at being known is the easiest person in the world to walk up to and pretend to know, because he has no idea what the real thing is supposed to feel like. And on top of that, we had handed him a rule that his loneliness was a weakness to be managed privately. So he managed it privately. For years. In an apartment where nobody moved anything. 2 secrets side by side, both of them kept out of love. And between the 2 of them, they held the door open and Dana Mercer walked straight through it. Money is a tool, Norman always said. Well, so is silence. And we had both used ours badly. What happens now, I said finally. And I watched my son straighten up in the chair, and something came back into his face that I had not seen since before that gala. The steadiness, the methodical thing. The boy with the 2-column legal pad. First he said no more secrets between you and me. Not one. I want to see everything. Dad's estate, all of it. Every account, the trust papers, the whole picture. Brock, I said you never wanted to know. I never wanted to know because knowing felt like waiting for you to die. he said. That was the deal in my head, and it was a stupid deal. I want to know now, Mom. I am done being protected from my own life. It has not worked out. You can see every page I said. I mean that. I will call Patricia today. Second, he said, I want to know who Garrett Vance actually is. He said the name flatly. Because a man who handles a family's money does not drive out to a widow's house to threaten her with probate court, he said. That is not a thing that happens. And a man saved in a married woman's phone as one letter who takes a 38-minute call from her at 3 a.m. on her honeymoon is not managing anybody's portfolio. I felt a small cold thread go up the back of my neck because he was saying out loud a thing I had been circling all night without landing on. I think you are right, I said slowly. He does not move like somebody's employee, Brock said. He moves like a man who owns something. So we began that same afternoon to pull the thread. We sat side by side at my kitchen table with 2 laptops and a legal pad between us and my reading glasses on a string around my neck, and we started looking for Garrett Vance. Brock had one thing that turned out to be worth everything. When Vance handed me that proposal page and turned it to face me, I had not touched it. But I had photographed my own 11-page account of the meeting, and in it, I had written his name spelled correctly because he had said it, and I had asked him to repeat it. Garrett Vance. We started with the obvious. Michigan requires anybody who manages money for the public to be registered with the state or the federal government, and all of it is searchable, and all of it is free. We looked in every place a man like that is supposed to appear. There was nothing. No registration as a broker. No registration as an investment firm. No insurance producer license. No firm with his name on it in Michigan corporate filings, not as an officer, not as a resident agent. He handles our family's money, she had said. He was not licensed to handle anybody's money. Then Brock found the first real thread, and he found it in the smallest possible place. 2 district court small claims filings 5 years apart, both in counties on the other side of the state, both listing a Garrett R. Vance as plaintiff, both against individuals, both closed. That is not nothing, Brock said, but it is not much either. Look at the word I said. I had leaned over to see his screen and my finger was on it. In the second one in the docket text, somebody in a clerk's office had typed a 2-word description of the claim. It said unpaid loan. Not services, not goods, loan. High as a lender, I said. We spent the next 2 hours learning what kind. Ruth Caldwell picked up on the second ring, and when I told her what we had, she said, oh, Beverly and I could hear her putting down whatever she had been doing. 26 years in bank compliance teaches you a specific set of tricks, and Ruth walked us through them on speakerphone while Brock typed. Stop looking for his name, she said. Men like this do not lend under their own name. They lend through an entity, and the entity is the only thing with a paper trail. Go to the state corporation's database and search by his residential address instead. And then search the register of deeds in every county touching Kalamazoo for any mortgage where the lender is a limited liability company rather than a bank. Ruth, I said, I do not know his address. You have a small claims filing, she said. There is an address on the complaint. There was. It took us until 9 that night, and we found 3 companies. 3 limited liability companies registered to the same street address in Portage, all formed within 4 years of each other, all with the kind of names that mean nothing. Halstead Capital Group, Renwick Holdings, and one called Cardinal Point Funding. None of them had Garrett Vance listed as a member because Michigan does not require members to be named. But all 3 listed the same resident agent, and the resident agent was a woman with a different last name at the same Portage address. And Cardinal Point Funding, Brock said. He had gone very quiet. Mom, he said, come look at this. I got up and stood behind his chair. He had gone back into the county register of deeds, into the same public system where somebody had once found a building called Unit 4, and he had searched a name. Mercer Walter R. and Carol A. Comstock Township. There were 4 documents. The original purchase mortgage from 2003 from a savings bank that no longer existed under that name. A discharge of that mortgage in 2019 because they had paid their house off, which is a thing that ordinary careful people do and are proud of. Then, 20 months ago, a new mortgage. And then 14 months ago, another instrument recorded on top of it. The lender on both of the recent ones was Cardinal Point Funding, LLC. And then Brock opened the foreclosure notice, the one he had photographed in a hotel room in Greece 2 days before he flew home, the one he had not been able to identify a name on because of the way the paper had folded. And there it was in the caption at the top where it had been the entire time. Cardinal Point Funding, LLC. We both stopped moving. I remember hearing the clock in the hallway. High is not their money man, Brock said. No, I said. High is the man they owe. And I want to tell you what went through me. standing there behind my son's chair at 9 o'clock at night because it was not triumph. It was the opposite of triumph. It was the feeling you get when you have been reading a map upside down for an hour and you finally turn it over and understand that you are nowhere near where you thought you were. Garrett Vance had not come to my door as a friend of Dana's family or as anything else he had claimed to be. He had come as the holder of the paper on her parents' house. He had sat on my sofa drinking coffee I had poured wearing a suit in a house he had never been in and asked a stranger for $6 million. That is not a man overreaching for a daughter-in-law. That is a man collecting. And it meant I understood with a cold that started at the back of my neck and went all the way down that Dana had not brought him to my house at all. He had brought her. For the next 2 days, Brock and I worked the way Norman used to work a bad account, which is slowly on a paper checking every single thing twice before we allowed ourselves to believe it. We printed everything. I bought a 2-inch binder at the drugstore and a package of tab dividers, and we built the thing out in order the way I used to build a chart, because 31 years of nursing will do that to you, and because Patricia had told me on the phone that a case is not what you know it is, what you can hand somebody. What we assembled over those 2 days made me sick in a way that the $6 million demand never had. Garrett Vance lent money to people the banks had already finished with. That was the whole business. He was not competing with anybody. He waited at the end of the line, and the people who got to the end of that line were people with a sick child and a stack of denials from an insurance carrier and no other door left to knock on. He lent against houses. Only houses as far as we could tell, and only houses with equity in them, and preferably houses that people had paid off, because a paid-off house belonging to a family in a medical crisis is the single most valuable thing in his world. It is money that cannot run away. We found the interest rate on the Mercer note, because Michigan requires the mortgage instrument to be recorded, and the recorded instrument referenced the note terms. 22% plus a servicing charge plus a default rate that kicked in on a late payment and did not come back off. Brock ran the actual numbers on a legal pad 3 separate times because he did not believe them, and then he sat back and said a word I had not heard him say since he was in college. Effective annual rate, once you counted the default provisions and the fees, was somewhere north of 60%. That is not a loan, Ruth said flatly when we called her with it. Bev, listen to me, that is not lending. Nobody structures a loan like that expecting to be repaid. He is not in the money business. He is in the house business. The interest is not the product. The interest is the mechanism that makes sure he ends up with the collateral. We found 2 more. A man in Allegan County who had lost a small auto body shop to Renwick Holdings in 2019. A woman near Battle Creek whose vacant lot went to Halstead in 2021. Both quiet. Both handled through the courts correctly on paper in the ordinary way, no drama, no headlines. He never went 1 inch past the line where somebody official would have to notice him. I was careful. He was patient. He had been doing this for at least 11 years that we could see, and he was, I realized, standing at my own kitchen counter with a binder open in front of me, exactly the kind of person my husband had spent 41 years warning me about without ever once explaining why. The wrong kind of people, Norman said. They come to your door when you let it be known there is something inside worth taking. But it was Brock who found the thing that turned a sad story into a frightening one, and he found it on the 3rd night. And I will remember the look on his face for the rest of my life. He and Dana were still on the same phone account. Brock had set it up 2 months after she moved in because it was cheaper and because he had wanted in the way of a man who has been alone a long time to have her name next to his on something. He had not touched it. It sat there for 4 days while we chased corporate filings, and then on Wednesday night he opened his laptop at my kitchen table and logged in and pulled the message history for the number saved as G. He read it for 11 minutes without saying a word. Then he turned the laptop around and pushed it across the table to me, and his hand was not steady. Read these, he said. They were not what I had braced myself for. I think, if I am honest, I had prepared myself for something lurid. 2 people scheming. Little jokes at my son's expense. A pair of thieves dividing something up, calling him the vet, laughing. What I read instead was a woman being crushed slowly by somebody who was in no hurry. The messages from Vance were short and flat and almost polite, and the politeness was the thing that made them so ugly. There was no anger anywhere in them. There was no heat at all, just a man checking on an asset. One said the clock does not stop because the wedding is over. One said your father's payment came in light again. I would hate for the hospital to start asking Cody questions about coverage. One from the week before the wedding, I had to read twice before my brain would accept the arrangement of the words. You marry the vet, you get the family money, you clear your father's balance, and we are square. Simple as that. Do not overthink it. And there were her replies, and those were the worst part. Please. That was one entire message. Just the word please at 2:40 in the morning. I need more time. Hi is not what you think he is. Do not call the house. My mother answers the house. And one sent from Santorini at 3 in the morning local time, which would have been the middle of the call, or just after it. I said I would do it. I am doing it. Please just leave Cody out of this. There was no partnership in there anywhere. There was no accomplice. Garrett Vance had not recruited a clever woman to help him rob my family. He had taken a desperate girl's debt and her dying brother, and he had made a leash out of them, and then he had pointed her at my son the way you point a dog at a field. The 38-minute call at 3 in the morning on her honeymoon was not two conspirators reviewing the plan. It was a hostage checking in with the man holding the rope. I sat back from that screen and I felt every bit of my anger toward that girl curdle into something much heavier and much harder to carry. Because she had still done it. Every part of it. She had lied to my son, screened him like a name on a list, married him under a false flag, and let that man walk into my house. Not one of those things stopped being true because she had been crying on a bathroom floor while she did them. But she had done all of it with a knife held at her family's throat, and the hand on the knife belonged to the man in the good suit, and he was the one I wanted now. There is a difference, I said to Brock, between the person who lights a fire and the person who hands them the match, because somebody is holding her brother over the flames. It does not make her innocent, he said. No, I said. It does not. But it tells us which one of them to aim at. He nodded slowly. He was still looking at the screen. I watched grief and fury take turns across my son's face for the better part of a minute. She could have told me, he said finally. From the first week. From the gala. I would have helped her mom. Not with your money, I would not have asked you for $1. But I could have sat down with her father. I could have found somebody. I could have done something. I know, I said. Why did she not tell me? Because people who are drowning almost never believe a rope is real, I said. Not until after they have already gone under reaching for the wrong thing. He closed the laptop. There is something else, he said. Something I have not been able to put down since I read it. What? The message about her father's payment coming in light, he said. Look at the date on it. That is 11 months ago. Mom, she met me 9.5 months ago. I looked at it. He was already leaning on her before she ever walked into that gala, Brock said. This did not start with me. I was not the plan. I was the solution to a problem that already existed. I was quiet. Which means somewhere in the last 11 months, somebody sat down and decided that the way out was to find a rich man and marry him, he said. And I would like to know very much which one of them had that idea first. I called Patricia Hale the next morning at 8 and asked her to come to the house. Then I called Dale Brooks and asked him to come at the same time, and Dale, who had not raised his voice in the 30 years I had known him, said Beverly is somebody trying to move money. Somebody is trying, I said. I will be there at 10, he said, and I could hear him already standing up. The four of us sat around my dining table at 10:15, Brock and I on one side, Patricia Hale in her navy suit with a legal pad, and Dale Brooks in the brown cardigan on the other. Between us, the 2-inch binder with the drugstore tabs. I laid it out in order and I made myself go slowly. The screening and the Unit 4 slip. The 19 minutes and the drawer. The changes in my son. Ruth's phone call. The engagement and the $25,000 and the text about widows who were left comfortable. Then the folder with the pre-stamped notarial block, and I laid the photographs on the table in a row. Then the Mercedes, the $6 million, the competency threat word for word off my 11 pages. Then Cardinal Point funding and the Mercer mortgage, and the foreclosure and the interest rate, and the 2 other people in 2 other counties who had lost things. And then the messages printed out in a tab of their own. Patricia did not interrupt once. She took notes in that small, precise handwriting she uses in court, and twice she stopped me and made me go back and repeat something exactly. When I finished, she set down her pen and took off her glasses and looked at me for a good 5 seconds. Beverly, she said, I want to say 2 things, and I want to say the easy one first. All right. They were never getting $1 of your money through any court in this state. Not one. I told you that on the phone, and I am telling you again at your table because I want you to stop carrying it. Your son has no claim on your property while you are living. His wife has less than none. The conservatorship threat was theater, and I would have looked forward to it. That is the easy one. And the hard one, I said. She put her glasses back on. The hard one is that what you have in this binder is considerably more serious than a family squabble about money, and I need you to understand that we are no longer talking about your estate. We are talking about several felonies, and I am going to have to bring in people who are not me. She turned the binder toward herself and went through it tab by tab as she talked. The demand by itself, she said, is ugly but thin. Asking a wealthy relative for money is not a crime, even at your own mother-in-law's coffee table 5 days after a wedding. Threatening to file a lawsuit is generally not a crime either. Where it starts to change is when the threat is to manufacture a legal proceeding that you know to be baseless in order to extract property. That begins to look like extortion under Michigan law, and our statute on malicious threats to extort is not a narrow one. She turned a page. This, however, she said, and she tapped the photographs of the notarial block. This is not a gray area at any angle. A document drafted to look like an event insurance rider that actually grants a third-party durable authority over your accounts and your real property presented to you for signature under a false description of what it is. That is fraud in the plainest form the word has. She leaned forward. But look at the notary block, Beverly. Look at what is actually in front of us. Somebody executed a jurat, under seal, certifying that they personally appeared with you and witnessed you sign and swear to that instrument. And you never signed it. You never met that person. That is a false certificate under the Michigan Notary Public Act, and depending on how the prosecutor charges it, it is also forgery and uttering and publishing. She looked up. And here is what I want you to appreciate about your own conduct that evening. That crime was complete the moment that stamp went on the page. It did not need your signature. It happened before you ever touched it, and you have it photographed front and angled with the emboss visible on a date-stamped file, and you can testify that you never signed and never met the notary. She sat back. Beverly, she said, most people in your position hand me a feeling and a phone call. You handed me a case. I thought about myself standing at the counter under the good light over the sink taking pictures of somebody else's paperwork, while my heart went sideways, feeling like a criminal. For the first time in my life, I was glad to be a suspicious old woman. And Vance Brock said. Patricia's expression cooled in a way I would not have wanted pointed at me. Mr. Vance, she said, is a different order of problem entirely, and a considerably more serious one for him. Michigan has a criminal usury statute. Most people do not know that. If you knowingly charge, take, or receive interest above 25% per year on a loan that is not otherwise permitted by law, that is a felony, and it carries up to 5 years. Your effective rate here is north of 60. She tapped the printed messages. And then there is this. Using a debtor's dying child as leverage. Telling a woman that the hospital might start asking her brother questions about his coverage. That is not aggressive collections. That is a threat to injure a person in order to compel her to act against her will, and it is exactly what the extortion statute was written for. She closed the binder. He has been careful for 11 years, she said. He has stayed one step under the level of attention that gets a man noticed. And then he got greedy and drove out to a house he had never been to, sat down in a stranger's living room and said the quiet part to a retired nurse with a very good memory and a legal pad. Dale Brooks had said almost nothing through all of it. He had a way of listening that made you think he had fallen asleep. Now he opened his own folder and laid 2 pages on the table. Beverly, he said, I want to tell you what I have already done because I did it Tuesday, and I did not ask. Go ahead, Dale. Every account you hold with us is now under a verbal callback protocol, he said. That means no instruction moves a dollar, not a wire, not a transfer, not a change of address until I personally speak to you on a number I already have on file. And you give me a phrase we agreed on in 2016, and which I have never written down. I had forgotten that phrase existed. Norman had picked it. I also flagged every account against any power of attorney presented by any third party, he said. If a document with your name on it walks into any branch in this state, it stops, and my phone rings and nobody gets told why. He looked at me over his glasses. There is one more thing, and I want you to hear it from me, and not later, he said. The trust for Brock. It is $1 million, and it distributes on his 35th birthday, which is in 22 months. Brock said, that is mine. That is not Mom's. That is right, Dale said. And that is the point. Beverly, if these people had gotten nothing else out of this, if your son had simply stayed married for 22 more months, $1 million would have landed in his lap. And a spouse in a Michigan divorce may well make a claim against what happens to that money once it is commingled, and there are 100 ways to commingle a distribution without meaning to. Nobody said anything for a second. They had a floor under this whole thing, Dale said. Even if the $6 million never came, even if Beverly never signed a page, all they had to do was wait. I looked at my son, and my son looked at the table. That is what she was, he said quietly. A 22-month hold on $1 million. We spent the next 2 hours building the plan. Patricia would prepare and serve a formal notice regarding any claim against my estate and would assemble the Vance material to hand to the county prosecutor's office and to the state agency that regulates lending. And she said flatly that she expected both of them to be interested and one of them to be very interested. Dale would keep the accounts locked and would put a second protocol on the warehouse leases because the rents were the only thing about me that had a public paper trail. Brock would say nothing to Dana at all, not one word, not a text until Patricia said so. And then there would have to be a conversation with the girl herself. Patricia wanted it done properly. On her terms, in her conference room, recorded with consent on the record with counsel present with a court reporter if she could get one on short notice. And I understood exactly why she wanted that, and I told her she could have all of it. But I asked her for one thing first. I want to talk to her here, I said. Before the conference room and the recording and the notice. I want one conversation at that table where I look at her and she looks at me. Beverly, Patricia said. Let me finish, I said. I am not doing this because I have gone soft. I am doing it because I spent 31 years learning to tell the difference between a person who is rotten and a person who did a rotten thing while something terrible was happening to them. Those are not the same animal, and you do not treat them the same way, and I am not willing to help take a wrecking ball to a frightened girl until I know which one is sitting in my living room. Patricia looked at me for a long moment. I will be present, she said. In the room, not in the hallway. And Beverly, you will not make her a single promise. Not a suggestion of one. Not a maybe. You say nothing that a defense attorney could stand up and characterize as an offer. Agreed, I said. Then we will do it your way, she said. After they left, Brock stood at the window over the sink for a long time looking out at the garden with a dish towel in his hands that he was not using. I wish Dad were here, he said. Me too, I said. He would have seen that man coming from the other end of a parking lot, Brock said. I thought about that. I have thought about it a great deal since, and I understand now that it was truer than either of us knew, and for reasons neither of us could have guessed that afternoon. He would be proud of how you are handling this, I said. That is what matters now. We called her that evening. Brock made the call himself. He sat at the kitchen table with the phone on speaker and Patricia's instructions written on an index card in front of him, and his voice was steadier than I expected it to be. He said that he had been thinking and that he wanted to sit down with her and his mother and discuss family financial matters, and that he would appreciate it if she came out to the house tomorrow afternoon. I heard the eagerness come into her voice right through the phone. I heard her decide in real time that the old woman had finally cracked. Of course, darling, she said, of course. I think that is so healthy. And I felt sorry for her, which surprised me because she had no idea that she was getting into a car to drive toward the end of the only plan she had left. She arrived at 2:10 the next day in a beige sedan with 100-and-something thousand miles on it and a cracked side mirror held on with tape. That was the first thing that told me something, and it told me two things. That Garrett Vance had not come with her, and that he did not know about this meeting. And that the woman in the white pantsuit and the diamonds had gotten out of a car that was in worse shape than my son's Subaru. She came up my walk with the brittle confidence of somebody arriving to negotiate. She had the smile ready. She had a bakery box in her hands, which I have never fully recovered from. She stepped into my living room and saw Patricia Hale sitting in the wing chair in the corner with a legal pad on her knee, and she stopped. It was only a beat. Then she recovered and turned to Brock and reached for his hand. Darling, she said. What is all this? Is your mother giving you trouble about us again? He stepped back from her hand. Gently. He did not make a thing of it. Sit down, Dana, he said. We need to talk. She sat. And for the first 10 minutes she gave the performance of her life, and I want to be fair to her and say that it was extraordinary. When Brock described what had happened in my living room the previous week, her hand came up and her fingertips pressed against her lips. Beverly, she said, turning to me, I have been so worried about you. I did not know how to bring this up. Garrett is a friend of my family. He has known my parents for years, and he offered to come with me because I honestly did not know how to have that conversation with you alone. It got completely away from me. He was far more forceful than I expected, and I have been sick about it since. That is not what I heard, I said. I know how it must have sounded, she said. I know. It was a disaster. He is a blunt man, and I should never have let him lead. When I described the folder and the pages behind the cover sheet, she shook her head slowly with a kind of sad patience. Beverly, that was the insurance writer, she said. The venue's coordinator sent it over. I never read past the first page myself. I just did what she told me. If there was something wrong in it, then she gave me the wrong packet, and I am mortified. But you have to know that I would never. And the tears came up. Right on time. beautifully. Her chin did the small thing that chins do. I will be honest with you. If I had not spent 31 years sitting across from people performing their innocence in small rooms under bad lighting, I might have taken some of it. She was good. She was very good. But I had, and she was not better than 3 decades of practice. I let her get all the way to the end of it. Norman used to say never interrupt a man who is talking himself into a corner, and it turns out the same is true of a woman with a bakery box. When she paused for breath, I said one sentence. A wife who married for love, I said, does not bring the holder of her father's mortgage to her mother-in-law's house 5 days after the wedding to ask for $6 million. The room went absolutely still. I watched her eyes go to Patricia in the corner, then to Brock, then back to me, and I could see the machinery behind them running very fast, recalculating, looking for the version of the story that still worked. She did not find one, but she tried. She opened her mouth. And it was my son who ended it. Brock took out his phone. He set it down flat on the coffee table between them and turned the screen so that she could see it, and on it was the message thread with the number saved as G. He did not shout. I have thought about that a lot. He read it in the flat, careful voice he uses when he is telling somebody in an exam room that the mass is not a cyst. You marry the vet, he read. You get the family money, you clear your father's balance, and we are square. Simple as that. Do not overthink it. He looked up at her. I know about Cody, he said, and his voice broke just slightly on the name, 1 syllable of it. I know about the leukemia and the relapse in October and the trial in Ohio, he said. I know about the house in Comstock and the second mortgage and who your father borrowed from. I found the folder in the safe in Santorini, Dana. I have known since the second night of our honeymoon. He sat back. So you can stop now, he said. The performance held for 1 more second. There was one last flicker, one more attempt at the shape of denial, and then it simply went. It did not crack or crumble. It collapsed the way a tent collapses when somebody pulls the last stake all at once straight down. The tears that came next were nothing whatsoever like the first ones. Those had been on a schedule. These were ugly and silent and came out of her in a way she was clearly fighting and losing. She put both hands over her face and stayed like that for a while, and Brock did not move, and Patricia did not write anything down, and I sat in my own living room and watched a 30-year-old woman come apart on my sofa. When she finally spoke, her voice was so small I had to lean forward to hear it. I was going to take the house, she said. She set it into her hands, with Cody still in it. There is a hospital bed in the dining room because he cannot do the stairs anymore, and my mother sleeps in the chair beside it most nights. Garrett said if I did not find the money, he would foreclose, and it would be legal, and it would be fast, and I would have done anything. She took her hands down. Do you understand, she said. Anything. To keep my brother from being moved out of that house to die in a worse one. Nobody said anything. Why did you not tell me, Brock said. And there it was, the only question he had wanted to ask for 11 days. She looked at him. Because you would have helped, she said. I did not understand that. Neither did he. I saw it go across his face. That is not an answer, he said. It is the only one I have, she said. Brock, if I had told you in month 2, you would have gone straight to him. You would have driven out to Portage with your checkbook and your nice manners, and you would have said, hello, I am Dana's boyfriend, let us work this out like adults. And he would have smiled at you and shaken your hand. Her voice cracked. And then he would have owned you too, she said. That is what he does. He does not take money from people. He takes people. And you would have walked in the front door of it yourself, and I would have been the one who opened it. Brock did not say anything. And there was the other thing, she said. She stopped. What other thing? Patricia said from the corner. It was the first sound she had made. Dana looked at her, and then at Brock. And then she said the thing that turned the entire story over one last time. The plan was never supposed to include this, she said. You. Any of it. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. I screened you, she said. At the gala. That part is exactly what your mother thinks it is, and I am not going to sit here and dress it up. I ran the guest list 2 days before. I knew your family's real estate holdings, and I had a capacity range on your mother before I knew what color your eyes were. I put on a blue dress, and I stood by that fountain for 40 minutes because that is where you would come out for air. I know how that sounds. It is worse than it sounds. Brock said nothing, but somewhere in the middle of it, she said. And I cannot even point to when. I cannot give you a day. Somewhere in the middle of it, I stopped pretending, and I did not tell anybody, because the second I said it out loud to myself, it meant that I was going to lose either my brother or you, and I could not survive picking. She looked at him, and her face was completely undefended. and I have never in my life seen anybody look so much like they were standing in the open. So I did not pick, she said. I just kept going, and I told myself I would find a way, and there was no way. And now I have destroyed the only real thing that happened to me in the worst year of my life with my own 2 hands on purpose over 10 months while it was happening. She stopped. That is the part you will never believe, she said. And I do not blame you. I fell in love with you for real, Brock. And I found out too late to do anything with it except wreck it. I found out too late to do anything with it except wreck it. That sentence hung in my living room, and nobody moved to fill the space after it. The furnace came on. Somewhere outside, a car went past on Hollow Creek Road. Brock sat very still and looked at the woman he had married, and I could see him working out whether to believe her, and I could see, which was worse, exactly how much of him wanted to. Patricia Hale watched all of it from the wing chair, with the unreadable patience of a person who has learned that the most important thing in any room is usually the thing that nobody has said yet. And as it turned out, there was a great deal that nobody had said yet. Dana left a little after 4. She did not ask for anything. She did not ask what would happen next, which I noticed and Patricia noticed. She took her bakery box back off my counter, which broke something in me that I did not expect, and she went out to that beige sedan and sat in it for 4 minutes before she started it. Patricia stayed another hour. She wrote for most of it. Beverly, she said at the door, I am going to have somebody run Mr. Vance properly. Not the way you and your son ran him, which was frankly better than I expected, but properly. Court records in every county, civil and criminal. Business filings in 3 states. Liens, judgments, tax records, everything a licensed investigator can legally reach. All right. I want everything about that man on my desk before I walk into a prosecutor's office, she said, because I intend to walk in there once. She called me at 8:30 the following morning. I was standing at this counter in my bathrobe with the coffee just finished, and I picked up and said good morning, and Patricia said Beverly. Sit down. I did not sit down. Tell me. Sit down, she said again, and there was something in her voice I had never heard in 20 years. So I pulled out a chair and sat. I have the report, she said. The loan and the threats are not the worst of it. There is something underneath all of this that changes the entire situation, including the marriage. What? Garrett Vance is married, she said. Legally, currently, never divorced. I did not say anything. And the woman he is married to, Patricia said, whose name is on a certificate filed 7 years ago in a county 2 states from here, is Dana Mercer. I held the phone against my ear, and I looked at the coffee maker, and I did not move at all, because the floor of this story, the floor I thought we had finally hit standing at my kitchen table with a binder full of mortgages, had just opened up underneath my feet again. Say that to me slowly, I said. She said it slowly. 7 years ago, she said. October. Dana Mercer was 23 years old. She and Garrett Vance were married in a county courthouse in Indiana. It is a valid, properly recorded marriage. We have looked for a dissolution in every jurisdiction where either of them has ever lived, worked, filed a tax return, or registered a vehicle, and there is not one. There is no divorce. There is no annulment. There is nothing. Patricia. Which means, Beverly, that when that young woman stood up in front of 150 people last month and married your son, she was already somebody's wife. I put my hand flat on the table. So it is not a marriage, I said. It is not a marriage, Patricia said. And I want to be careful with the words here because they matter. This is not a marriage that Brock would have to fight to get out of. It is not voidable. It is void. Michigan is very direct about this. A marriage contracted while either party has a living husband or wife, where the earlier marriage was never dissolved, is void from the beginning. Not from the date a judge says so. From the beginning. As a matter of plain law, that ceremony had no legal effect at all. What does he have to do, I said. Practically speaking, he files a petition and a judge signs a decree confirming the marriage is a nullity, she said. It is not a divorce. There is no property division, no spousal support, no waiting period, nothing to negotiate, nothing for anybody to make a claim under. It exists to clean up the record so that no bank or insurer or county clerk is ever confused. It is paperwork. He will be in and out of a courtroom in under 15 minutes. I let out a breath I think I had been holding since the Mercedes. And there is nothing she can claim I said. There is nothing, Patricia said. There never was. Which brings me to the part I need you to sit with. I am sitting. Beverly, think about what this actually is, she said. Not what it means for us. What it is. And I did, and it came in on me the way cold water comes into a boot. Garrett Vance had not simply lent money to a desperate family and used a dying boy as pressure. That was bad enough to keep a person awake. He had taken his own wife. a girl he had married when she was 23 years old. He had kept that marriage undissolved and unmentioned for 7 years, and then he had sent her out to marry a wealthy stranger so that the stranger's family money would come back to him through her. The leash was never really the debt. The debt was the reason. The leash was a marriage certificate in a county clerk's office in Indiana that she had never been allowed to get out of. And then, standing there in my bathrobe with the coffee going cold, I understood the other half of it. And it was so ugly that I actually said something out loud into an empty kitchen. "Patricia," I said, "if she had gone to the police, if she had gone to Brock or to me or to anybody at any point and told the truth, what happens to her?" There was a pause. "Bigamy is a felony in Michigan," Patricia said. "Up to 4 years. Say the rest of it." "She could be prosecuted," Patricia said. "He almost certainly could not because he did not marry anybody the second time. She is the one who stood up and made a vow while married. She is the one whose name is on 2 certificates. On the face of it, she committed the crime and he did not." "He built it that way," I said. "I believe he did," Patricia said. "And Beverly, listen. She would have a real defense. Duress is a defense, and what is in those messages is about as clear a picture of coercion as I have seen. A reasonable prosecutor would look at this and go straight past her to him. But that is not what a 23-year-old girl in a courthouse understands. 7 years later at 2 in the morning when the man tells her she will go to prison and her brother will die alone. She never had a door," I said. "She had one," Patricia said. "She was told for 7 years that it was a wall. I told Brock that afternoon. I made him sit down first at the same kitchen table, and I told him the whole thing straight through, the way I had told him about the Mercedes, because we had a rule now, and the rule was no more managing each other. I watched my son take it. I did not rage. I had half expected rage, and I think a part of me had wanted it, because rage would have been simple. He sat there for a long time with his hands flat on the table and looked at the grain, and when he finally spoke, he said the thing that told me he was all the way through and past any argument his father's son. So she was not free either, he said. No, I said. None of it was a choice she got to make as a free person, he said. Not the gala, not the wedding, not the folder she put in front of you. She was doing what somebody who owned her told her to do. I looked up. It does not undo any of it, he said. She still did it. She could have run. People do run. It does not undo 1 hour of it. No, I said, it does not. But she was not free, he said. No, sweetheart, I said. She was not. He nodded slowly several times, and I watched my son set down some portion of the betrayal he had been carrying. Not because it stopped hurting, because it had gotten too complicated to keep carrying as a simple thing. And then he said in a completely different voice, the practical voice, the one from the legal pad, "Then he is holding a felony over her head that he manufactured on purpose 7 years ago," he said. "Which means he can do it again to somebody else. Which means we are not finished." No, I said, we are not. It was 3 days after that, on an ordinary Tuesday, that I found the second letter. Patricia needed originals for the nullity filing and for the package she was building. The deed to the Galesburg property, the original trust instrument, the certified copy of Norman's death certificate. All of it was in a safe deposit box at the bank on Michigan Avenue Box 1147, and I had been given the key the week after the funeral and had never once opened it. I want to be honest about why. It was not laziness, and it was not grief exactly. It was that a safe deposit box is the last private drawer of a person's life, and as long as I had not opened it, there was still one room in my husband that I had not finished walking through. A young teller with a lanyard took me back to the vault and turned her key in mine and pulled the long metal box out of the wall and carried it to a little windowless room with a table and 2 chairs and a door that closes. "Take as long as you need, Mrs. Bishop," she said, and left me alone. I lifted the lid. It was all there, and it was all in order, because of course it was. The deed, the trust, the insurance policies in their original envelopes, the title to a truck he sold in 1998 for some reason. Everything squared up and stacked and rubber banded, arranged by a man who arranged things. And underneath all of it, at the bottom of the box, there was a white envelope with my name on the front in his handwriting. B. That was all it said. Just Bev in the block capitals he used for everything because his cursive had been ruined by 40 years of clipboards. I sat down in that little room, and I held it for a while before I opened it. He had dated it. April, the year before the stroke. He had written it 14 months before anything happened to him, which means he wrote it while he was fine, sitting somewhere in our house on an ordinary day thinking about this. It was 4 pages front and back in pencil. I am going to tell you what was in it. And I am not going to try to give it to you the way he wrote it, because his sentences were his and they belonged to me, and I have found that I do not want to hand them around. But you need to know what was in it, because it is the whole reason any of this ended the way it did. He told me a story he had carried for 57 years and never once told me whole. When Norman was a boy before the mill town and before the factory job, his family had not been poor. His father, Elton Bishop, had built a small lumber and millwork business up north. Not big. 6 employees a yard, 2 trucks, contracts with builders in 3 counties. But solid and growing, and enough that they had a good house and a car that was not embarrassing, and enough that there had been talk, actual talk at the dinner table about Norman going to college for engineering. And then a man came into their lives. He arrived as a friend of a friend. He was pleasant. He was patient. He was interested in Elton in a way that Elton, who was a plain man who worked with his hands, was not accustomed to being found interesting. He came to dinner. He remembered the children's names and their ages. He gave Norman's mother a set of good knives at Christmas. He came around for 2 years before he ever proposed anything. When he did, it was an expansion, a second yard and a partnership and a set of papers. Norman wrote that he could remember the exact afternoon his father signed. He wrote that his father had come into the kitchen afterward and put his hands on the back of a chair and said, "Well." Just that. Well. And his mother had asked whether he was sure, and his father had said, "He has been sitting at this table for 2 years, Ada." By the end of the following year, the accounts were empty, and the man was gone. He had taken everything that was liquid, and then he had used the authority the partnership papers gave him to borrow against everything that was not. And by the time anybody understood what had happened, the Bishops did not merely have nothing. They had less than nothing, because the debts he had run up in the business name were real and enforceable, and the man who ran them up could not be found. Norman was 21 when the yard was sold at auction. He was 22 when his father had what people in 1959 called a nervous collapse, and never really came back from it and stopped working and sat in a chair by a window for 11 years until he died. Norman left school and went to work in a hardware store. Then he drove a truck for somebody else. Then at 31, he bought a used International with a bad clutch and a bank loan he had to ask 3 banks for. That was the story. He wrote that he never told me because he did not want that man living inside our marriage. He wrote that he had watched what carrying it did to his mother, who talked about it constantly for the rest of her life, and he had decided at some point that he would rather carry it silently than let it into another house. And then he wrote the part that I have read more times than I have read anything else in my life. He said that everything I had ever teased him about was that man. The coupons, the 8-year-old cars, the refusal to put the company name on anything but the trucks, the fact that in 41 years he never once told a soul at church what the business was worth, the way he raised our son to believe there was nothing behind him but his own 2 hands. It was never greed, he wrote, and it was never fear of spending, and I am sorry I let you think it was a small thing about money for 40 years. It was that I learned when I was 21 exactly what kind of person comes for a family when it gets around that there is something inside worth taking. They do not come with a gun, Bev. They come with a casserole. They sit at your table for 2 years. They learn your children's names. Keep us quiet. Keep our boy from having to learn what I learned the way I learned it. And then the last thing. He wrote that if somebody ever did come for what we had built, I would know them. Because they will smile at you, he wrote exactly the way that man smiled at my father. I sat in that little room at the bank, and I cried the way I had not cried at the funeral with my hand over my mouth, so the girl outside would not hear for about 10 minutes. Not only for grief, though there was plenty of that. I cried because I had been married to a man for 41 years, and I had understood the smallest, most visible fraction of why he was the way he was, and he had been standing in front of me the entire time trying to hand me something. Every coupon, every sensible car, every single time he said, "Flash it around and you invite the wrong kind of people to your door," and I rolled my eyes and said, "Norman, nobody is coming." He was not being careful with money. He was standing watch. For 41 years. Over a house nobody was watching but him. And here is the thing that broke me open in that little room and then put me back together in a different shape. For 6 months I had been sick over the silence. Sick over it. Lying to Dana about the accounts on the phone. Keeping Ruth's promise while my son stopped calling me at 7. Sitting at table 4 at his wedding with photographs of a fraudulent notarial block on my phone and saying nothing. I had told myself in the dark that I was being a coward and a suspicious old woman, and that whatever happened between me and my boy afterward, I had earned by keeping my mouth shut. And it turned out that the silence had not been my failure at all. It had been the last thing Norman ever taught me, and I had been doing it correctly the whole time without knowing why. Because a smiling man had come for what we built exactly as he said one would, and because I had kept us quiet, because I had lied on the telephone about the accounts, because I had photographed the pages instead of signing them, because I had called a lawyer instead of writing a check that man was going to leave here with nothing. I put the letter in my purse, and I took the deed and the trust papers out to the counter, and I signed the vault log with a steady hand, and I drove home. I did not tell Brock about the letter that day. I told him 2 days later, and I let him read it himself at the kitchen table, and I went out to the garden so he could do it alone. When I came back in, he was sitting with the last page in front of him, and he said without looking up, he was 21. How was I said? He was younger than I was when I was worried about a water heater in East Lansing, Brock said. And he never said a word. Not one I said. Brock folded the pages back along Norman's creases very carefully, the way you handle an animal that is already gone. I was not trying to make me tough, he said. Was he? No, I said. He was trying to make you unreachable. Which is not the same thing, Brock said. No, I said. It is not. And it did not work. And I want you to hear me say out loud that your father and I got that part wrong. We got a great deal right. We got that part wrong. If you had grown up in a house where people said hard, true things at the table, that woman would have had nothing to walk through. He nodded. I was quiet a while. I think I want to do something with this, he said. What do you mean? Not now, he said. When it is over. But I think I want to do something with this. The plan, when Patricia finally laid it out on my dining table, was 3 moves, and she said we would make them in this order and no other. The first was Cody Mercer. I want to be very clear about how this came about, because it did not come from generosity. It came out of a conversation about leverage. Patricia said we can hand this file to the prosecutor tomorrow, but I want you both to understand what happens next if we do. There will be an investigation. It will be thorough, and it will not be fast. And the entire time, Garrett Vance is still holding a valid recorded mortgage on that house in Comstock, with an active foreclosure proceeding attached to it. He can complete that foreclosure while the investigation is going on. Nothing stops him. And the day he does, he takes the roof off a 19-year-old with leukemia, and he takes away the only reason Dana Mercer would ever be willing to say a word about any of this on the record. She looked at me. Beverly, right now, that boy is not a person to him. That boy is a control mechanism. And as long as the mechanism works, we are working against a man who has a hostage. So take it away from him, I said. You can, Patricia said. And I want you to understand exactly why this works, because it is the most beautiful thing in this entire case. A borrower has an absolute right to pay off a loan. He cannot refuse it. He cannot say no thank you, I would rather have the house. If Walter Mercer requests a payoff statement, Cardinal Point Funding is required to produce one. And if that payoff is tendered in full, the debt is extinguished, and they must record a discharge of the mortgage. It is not a negotiation. It is arithmetic. How much, Brock said. Patricia looked at her notes. Principal accrued interest at their rate. Default interest and every junk fee they have piled on since March, she said. $418,000 and change, and it goes up every day. $418,000. I have to tell you what I felt when she said that number, because it was not noble. It was the opposite of noble. It was a kind of vertigo. I had sat in my own living room 11 days earlier and refused to give $6 million to people who threatened me. And now I was being told that $418,000, which is a fortune to almost every human being alive, and which was to me about 11 days of what the accounts made while I was asleep, would take a knife off a boy's throat. Do it, I said. Patricia held up one finger. There are conditions, she said, and they are not negotiable, and they are not kind. This is not a gift, and it cannot look like one. Explain that. If you hand Walter Mercer $418,000, Patricia said, then 2 years from now, a defense attorney stands up and says that the elderly complaining witness paid the debtor's family a substantial sum before they cooperated. He says the word bought. He says it to a jury. I will not give him that. Then what I said. We do it correctly, she said. You fund an irrevocable trust. I am the trustee. The trust tenders the payoff directly to Cardinal Point Funding through my office, not to the Mercers, and never a dollar into their hands. Your name is not on the tender. It is not on the discharge. The Mercers will know that somebody paid it. They will not know who, and I will not tell them, and neither will you, and neither will your son. Ever, I said. Ever, Patricia said. And Beverly, that is not only for the case. That is for you. Because if they know, then every time that family looks at you for the rest of your life, they will be looking at what they owe. I have watched that ruin people who meant well. Brock said in Cody's treatment, The trial in Ohio is a separate problem, Patricia said, and a solvable one. Hospitals have patient assistance funds through their foundations. You can fund one. You can restrict it by diagnosis and age range and county in a way that means exactly one person in the state currently qualifies, and it is entirely legal, and the family will simply be told that their financial counselor found a program. She closed her folder. He will never know who paid for it, she said. Not for the rest of his life. Good, I said. I did not have to think about it for 1 second, and I want to explain why, because it was not because I am a good person. It was because Cody Mercer was 19 years old, lying in a hospital bed in a dining room in Comstock, and he had not done one single thing to anybody. He had not run a screening report on my son. He had not put a forged notary stamp in front of me. He had gotten sick at 17, and everybody around him had been slowly destroyed by it, and then one of them had gone out and done something unforgivable trying to save him. I was a pediatric nurse for 31 years. I have never once in my life been able to look at a sick kid and see the sins of the people standing around the bed. Norman said money is a tool. I had been trying for 18 months to figure out what I was supposed to build with it. That was it. That was the thing. Take a boy out of a man's hands. The second move was the payoff itself, and it happened on a Friday morning, and it took 11 minutes. Patricia's office requested a payoff statement from Cardinal Point Funding on behalf of the borrowers with a signed authorization from Walter Mercer that Patricia had obtained through a lawyer in Kalamazoo, who told him only that a third party wished to satisfy the debt anonymously and that he should sign and ask no questions. Walter Mercer, who I have still never met, signed it in a parking lot. Cardinal Point had to produce the statement. That is the law. And the statement they produced on their own letterhead with their own numbers was the single best piece of evidence in the entire file because it itemized every fee and every day of default interest, and it did the arithmetic for us. $421,608. Patricia wired it that afternoon from the trust account. 14 days later, because they dragged it exactly as long as the statute allowed, Cardinal Point Funding LLC recorded a discharge of mortgage at the Kalamazoo County Register of Deeds, and the foreclosure was dismissed, and Walter and Carol Mercer owned their house free and clear for the second time in their lives. Brock drove out to Comstock Township one evening in June not to knock on the door, just to see it. He told me afterward that the porch light was on, and there was a ramp built over the front steps out of plywood and 2x4s done well, but done by somebody who had done it himself, and that he had sat in the Subaru at the end of the road for 10 minutes, and then driven home. I asked him what he was thinking about. I was thinking he said that her father built that ramp with his own hands and then borrowed against the house it is attached to, and neither one of those things was a stupid decision, and he still lost everything anyway. And I was thinking that could be anybody. That is what nobody tells you. That is anybody. The third move was Garrett Vance, and I asked for one thing. Patricia had the file finished. 211 pages indexed with the notarial photographs and the payoff statement and the messages and the corporate filings for all 3 companies and the 2 prior takings in 2 other counties. She was ready to walk it into the prosecutor's office, and she had already made the call. And I said, before you do that, I want to see him one more time. Absolutely not, Patricia said. Hear me out, I said. I heard myself say it, and I sounded like Norman, and I think that is why she stopped. He came to my house, I said. He sat on my furniture and drank coffee out of a cup I washed and told me that a judge might have questions about my mind. He did that because he looked at me and saw a 69-year-old widow in a cardigan with dirt under her nails, and he decided that I was going to be easy. And I want to be standing in front of him when he finds out he was wrong. I have earned that. Patricia looked at me for a long moment. Then we do it in my conference room, she said. Not your house. Never your house again. I will be present. Brock will not be, because I am not putting him in a room with that man. You will say nothing that is not on a page I have written. And Beverly, you will not enjoy it as much as you think. She was wrong about that last part. She sent a letter. It said only that the writer represented Beverly Bishop in connection with a proposal presented on May the 8th, that her client wished to discuss a resolution, and that Mr. Vance should attend at 10 o'clock on Thursday. He came. Of course he came. A man who has spent 11 years being right about people cannot resist a widow who has finally cracked. He wore a different suit and the same face. He shook Patricia's hand and he shook mine, and he said, Mrs. Bishop, I am very glad you reconsidered, and I want you to know there are no hard feelings on our side. Our side. 5 weeks after a marriage that had never legally existed. He sat down and opened the briefcase and started to lay out his 4 documents again, and Patricia said, you will not need those. Then she opened a folder and laid down 3 pages one at a time, and turned each one to face him. The first was the recorded discharge of mortgage on the Mercer property in Comstock Township. The second was the payoff statement from Cardinal Point Funding with its own itemization of default interest and fees, and beside it, a single sheet with the effective annual rate calculated and printed underneath the text of Michigan's criminal usury statute with the words 25% per annum underlined once. The third was a photograph of a notarial jurat embossed seal visible dated the 11th of April, certifying that Beverly Bishop had personally appeared and signed a durable power of attorney. I watched his face while he looked at the second one. That is the thing I came for, and I got it. And it lasted about a second and a half. There was no shock in it. It was smaller and better than that. It was the look of a man doing arithmetic and not liking the answer, the look of somebody who has just realized he is not the only person in the room who has been keeping records. I did not sign that document, I said. I looked up. I never signed it, I said. I never met that notary. I photographed it on my kitchen counter on the 6th of April, 5 days before somebody swore I stood in front of her. He said nothing. You came into my house, I said, and you looked at me and you decided what I was. I want you to know that I understand exactly how that works, because my husband explained it to me. He said men like you do not come with a gun. He said you come with a casserole, and you sit at the table for 2 years and you learn the children's names. Vance's expression did not move at all. And the debt is paid, I said. Every dollar of it on your own numbers on your own letterhead. There is no lien and no foreclosure, and there is no boy in a bed anymore for you to point at. Whatever hold you had on that family, you do not have it. It is gone. You handed me the receipt yourself. He put his hands on the arms of the chair. Mrs. Bishop, he said, and his voice was still perfectly pleasant. I think you have been given some very bad advice about what you are looking at. That may be, I said. In 3 days, it will be the prosecutor's problem to sort out. That was the whole thing. It took 4 minutes. He stood up and he buttoned his jacket, and at the door he stopped and turned around. And I will admit my heart was going. You are making a mistake, he said. You could have handled all of this quietly. I looked at him. That is exactly what my husband would have said 40 years ago, I told him. He would have handled it quietly and it would have eaten him for the rest of his life. I am not going to do that. He left and Patricia closed the door, and I sat down harder than I meant to, and my hands were shaking, and she poured me a glass of water and did not say anything for a while. Then she said, all right. That was better than I expected. Here is what happened afterward, and I will not stretch it out, because the truth about the aftermath of a thing like this is that it is slow and dull and made almost entirely of paperwork. Patricia walked the file in on a Monday. The prosecutor's office was interested. The state agency that regulates lending was, as she had predicted, very interested, and they had a file of their own with 2 complaints in it that had never gone anywhere for lack of a witness who would talk. Garrett Vance was charged the following spring. Criminal usury on 3 separate loans. Extortion. And because of a photograph a widow took on her kitchen counter under the light over the sink forgery and uttering and publishing, along with a woman in Portage who had been notarizing things for him for 6 years, and who, when investigators came, talked for 4 hours. He did not go to trial. Men like that almost never do. He took a plea in the fall and went away for a term that I am not going to characterize because people always want to know if it was enough, and there is no number that is enough. Dana was never charged with anything. Patricia had said a reasonable prosecutor would go past her to him, and this one did. She gave a statement over 2 days that Patricia described to me afterward as the most thorough account of a coercive relationship she had ever read, and she gave it without a single condition and without asking for anything. The nullity decree came through in August. It took 11 minutes in a courtroom in Kalamazoo, and Brock came out onto the steps afterward and stood in the sun and did not know what to do with his face. He paid off the wedding himself. $70,000, which was the balance after my gift on a 5-year note, he took out against the practice. I offered to cover it 4 times, and he said no 4 times. I have to clean up my own mess, he said. Dad would have expected that. I was right, and I let him, because that is what it means to let a man stand on his own 2 feet, and because I had learned by then that taking something out of somebody's hands is not always kindness. Dana I have never fully forgiven and never fully condemned, and I have made my peace with living in that uncomfortable middle for the rest of my life. She moved to Ohio to be near her brother's treatment. She and Brock exchanged 1 letter, and I have never asked what was in either of them. Cody Mercer got into the trial. His treatment was paid for by a patient assistance fund at a hospital foundation that a family financial counselor happened to find for him, restricted by diagnosis and age and county, in a way that meant exactly 1 person in the state qualified. He is 21 now. He is in remission. He does not know my name, and he never will. A year and 3 months after a wedding that the law says never happened, I sat on my porch on a cool September evening with my son and watched the light go gold over Norman's rose bushes. The practice had not just survived it. He had hired a second veterinarian and taken over the storefront next door. And he had started doing one evening a week at a program in Kalamazoo that teaches financial literacy to young adults aging out of foster care, which he had asked to volunteer for, and then characteristically had built a whole curriculum module for without being asked. I teach them what a power of attorney actually is, he told me. I teach them what a notary is for. I teach them that if somebody puts a document in front of you with the tabs already on it and a pen already uncapped, that is information, and the information is that they do not want you to read it. He had also started slowly and carefully this time, seeing somebody. Her name is Hannah Wells. She teaches special education at the middle school in Vicksburg. She drives a 14-year-old Corolla with a cracked taillight she keeps meaning to fix. And the first time Brock brought her to dinner, she spent almost the entire evening asking me about Norman. Not the company, not the sale, the man, what made him laugh, how we met, which was at a wedding where he stepped on my foot, whether he was a good dancer, which he was not and never became. She does not know about the inheritance, Brock said, walking me out to my car afterward. I did not say anything, and I am not going to tell her for a long time, he said. Not because I do not trust her, because I want to be absolutely certain first that it could never once change the way she looks at me. And Mom, I want to be able to say I'm sure. Not hope. Sure. He smiled, and it was the open, unguarded smile of the boy I raised come back to me after a long time away. Dad was right about a lot of things he said. Money reveals character. It just took all of this to show me how much. I turned 70 in February. I never expected to learn the things this past year taught me, and I want to give them to you plainly because I have found that the older I get, the less patience I have for a lesson wrapped in ribbon. I learned that a secret is not always a wall between people. Sometimes it is a roof held over them by somebody who is getting rained on. I learned that the worst person in a story and the most desperate person in it can be the same person standing in the same shoes, and that you can hold both of those facts at once without letting either one of them off the hook, and that anybody who tells you it has to be simpler than that is selling something. And I learned that the man I was married to for 41 years had been protecting us with his silence long after his own voice was gone. That every coupon and every sensible car was a hand on a door. That his caution was a form of love I did not understand until a smiling man finally came for what we built, and I recognized him exactly the way Norman promised I would. The $38 million is still there. It sits with Dale, who still wears the cardigan, and it grows, and it has never once made me happy. Its value was never the number. Its value is a scholarship fund with Norman Bishop's name on it that sends the children of long-haul drivers to school, and there are 9 of them right now, and 2 of them write to me. Its value is a 21-year-old boy in Ohio who got his time and his chance and will go his whole life not knowing where it came from, which is exactly how I want it. And its value is in the plain fact that what my husband spent 41 years building was not taken, not because I was clever, because he stood watch over us for 4 decades without ever once explaining why, and because he finally told me from the bottom of a metal box exactly how to know them when they came. Have you ever had to keep a secret in order to protect somebody you love? And did they ever find out? I would truly like to know. Tell me your story down there, and if mine was worth your time, stay a while and hear the next one, because I have learned the hard way